Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are going to dive into a subject that has fascinated the world for centuries: sleep. But not just any kind of sleep, Victorian sleep. You probably won't survive the rest of this night's tale without knowing how the Victorians battled their restless minds. You might even start to wonder if you would have made it through the night without their peculiar remedies. Were you living in Victorian times, would you have turned to the same odd practices to ensure a peaceful night of sleep? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. And, while you're at it, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It'll be fun to see where we all are in the world tonight. Now, turn off the lights, let's travel back in time. This video only shows ads at the end so you can sleep soundly. Victorian society was no stranger to insomnia. In fact, the mid-19th century saw an explosion of sleep-related remedies, fueled by a growing understanding of the mind, but also by a distinct fear of exhaustion. Victorians were often trapped in the clutches of restless nights. Maybe it was the stress of modern life, the hustle of the industrial age, or simply the impact of long working hours. Regardless of the reason, the Victorian obsession with sleep became almost as intense as their need to find a cure for it. As strange as it may sound now, the era was filled with elaborate rituals to combat sleeplessness, and one of the most prevalent treatments was the nightcap. That's right, the Victorian nightcap. You may think of a nightcap as a simple glass of wine or whiskey before bed today, but in the Victorian era, it wasn't just about the alcohol. It was about the ritual. The Victorians believed that alcohol, particularly the rich sweet port or brandy, had the power to send you into a deep, restful sleep. The idea was that a small glass of port before bed would relax both the body and mind, smoothing over the day's anxieties like a balm. Alcohol's soothing effects might sound like a no-brainer now, but for the Victorians it was their golden ticket to escape their busy minds. Of course, like all remedies, there's always a dark side to such habits, and historians still debate whether this practice truly had long-term benefits, or if it was just a temporary fix to a much larger issue. One thing is for sure, the Victorians didn't hesitate to use alcohol as a powerful tool in their sleep arsenal. In today's world, we might look at that habit with a raised eyebrow, but it's just one of many curious practices the Victorians used to fight insomnia. But were these nightcaps really effective? Or did they just create a false sense of sleepiness? Perhaps that's a question for another night, but let's move on. As the night settled in, and you felt the warmth of your nightcap beginning to lull you into a state of semi-drowsiness, it's time to look at another sleep remedy that was quite the staple in Victorian homes: lavender. Yes, the same lovely lavender you might find in modern bath products, or as a scent for your pillow was once considered a secret weapon in the fight against insomnia. But the way Victorians used it was far from subtle. Lavender wasn't just a smell, it was the very essence of sleep for many in Victorian England. The scent of lavender was believed to have a soothing effect on the mind and body, calming the nervous system, and helping to ease the transition from the waking world into the dream world. Victorian households often placed lavender sachets under their pillows or in their beds to create an atmosphere conducive to sleep. If you were feeling particularly adventurous, some even made lavender-infused oils, which were gently massaged into the temples before bed. The idea was simple. The smell of lavender would trigger a deep, natural sleep that was free of the modern-day distractions and anxieties. But did it work? Some experts at the time swore by it, but as with many Victorian remedies, it's difficult to say whether it was the lavender itself or simply the ritual of preparing for rest that made the difference. Historians still debate whether the effectiveness of lavender lies in its aromatic properties or in its calming association with nature. But one thing's for sure, it became a go-to sleep remedy during this period. Lavender was the sleep aid you could count on without the fear of side effects or long-term health concerns. You weren't likely to wake up with a headache or a groggy hangover after using it like with alcohol. However, as with most Victorian trends, it was more than just a plant. It was a lifestyle. Your house would have been filled with lavender, and even the sheets you slept on were sometimes infused with this calming herb. It was an everyday luxury for those who could afford it. But let's take a moment to consider something a little odd. There was another way lavender was used in the Victorian age that was a bit less common, and, to be honest, quite peculiar. Some Victorians believed that lavender could not only calm the mind for sleep, but could also aid in avoiding nightmares. Yes, you heard that right. Lavender was thought to be a protective force against the supernatural. It's said that many would hang small lavender sachets by their doors or windows, not only to aid their sleep, but to ward off evil spirits. If you think about it, it's not all that different from today's belief in sleeping with a nightlight or leaving the door cracked open to keep away the imagined monsters. There's something deeply human about wanting to protect ourselves while we're most vulnerable sleeping. Historians still debate whether the lavender and its supposed protection against nightmares was a deeply spiritual practice or just another comforting superstition, but either way, lavender was embedded deeply into Victorian culture. If you were one of the fortunate ones with the privilege to lay in a lavender-scented bed, you were considered to have mastered the art of sleep. It was an understated luxury wrapped in the scent of a tiny purple flower. But if lavender wasn't quite your thing, you could always try a different, albeit slightly less pleasant route. The Victorians had a peculiar relationship with scents. While lavender was soothing, other more pungent odors were thought to induce sleep in a completely different way. While lavender might have been the sweet floral choice for sleep, there were other far less fragrant solutions that the Victorians turned to. Among them, the application of cold water and hot compresses made their way into the sleep ritual, as curious as it may sound. At first, you might think, how can cold water possibly help me sleep? But the Victorians, ever resourceful, were convinced that it could, and in the most unusual of ways. Victorians were obsessed with the balance of heat and cold in their quest for a perfect night's rest. While a glass of port might warm you from the inside, they also believed that applying cold compresses to your forehead could bring about a sense of relaxation, especially after a particularly exhausting day. The reasoning behind it was simple, if a bit unorthodox. The coolness would soothe the mind, slow the heart rate, and ease the tension from a day's worries. People would soak cloths in cold water and press them to their temples or forehead, hoping to induce a calm, cool, and restful sleep. Some even believed it could prevent nightmares, though others swore by the cooling remedy simply for a peaceful slumber. Historians still debate whether this was a result of Victorian curiosity, or if they had stumbled upon something that had real merit in the science of sleep regulation. In any case, this peculiar practice was quite common, and many sleep-deprived individuals could be found clutching their cold compresses with a hopeful smile, preparing for the night ahead. But let's shift gears. In addition to cold compresses, Victorians took great pride in their bedtime rituals, each element meticulously planned and executed. It wasn't enough just to be tired. They wanted to make the entire sleep process an experience. For many, that meant turning to music. Yes, soothing melodies were seen as the ultimate relaxants, and it wasn't just the music you might listen to during a relaxing evening at home today. No, the Victorians weren't simply playing lullabies on a piano or a phonograph. Instead, they were much more creative with various instruments like the harp, the violin, and even the delicate sounds of a zither providing background music to help ease the mind. These gentle, melodic tones were thought to calm the nerves and quiet the thoughts that kept people awake at night. In fact, many households employed professional musicians who would perform soft, lullaby-like tunes to help members drift off to sleep. If you were lucky enough to be part of a wealthy Victorian household, it wasn't unusual for your evening to end with a live serenade of soft strings or the gentle plucking of a harp. The idea was to provide a soundscape that would relax the mind and let sleep take its course without interruption. Historians still debate whether the music truly made a difference in promoting sleep or if it was merely a luxury for the upper classes reserved for those with the means to hire musicians. The effectiveness of music for sleep remains a debated topic, though its presence in the Victorian sleep routine is undeniable. Whether it was the music itself, the setting, or simply the act of winding down with such a deliberate ritual, Victorians believed that every element of the pre-sleep process should be carefully curated for maximum relaxation. But, as always with the Victorians, their curiosity for perfecting sleep didn't stop there. As society became more aware of the body's needs, some were experimenting with, more invasive approaches. You might be surprised to hear that one such remedy involved a practice that today we would recognize as hypnosis. If you thought that the Victorian obsession with sleep was merely about lavender and soft music, brace yourself for one of the more unusual practices of the era hypnosis. In a time when the mind was still a vast and uncharted territory, Victorians turned to what they called magnetic sleep or mesmerism to solve their sleeplessness. At first, it may sound like the kind of practice you'd expect in a circus tent, but for Victorians, it was very much a legitimate attempt to cure insomnia. The technique, based on the theories of a German physician named Franz Anton Mesmer, involved the use of magnetic energy. Mesmer believed that all living things had an invisible force within them, and through various gestures and rituals, one could manipulate this force to induce sleep or a trance-like state. While the science behind it was dubious at best, mesmerism became a popular practice during the Victorian period. People would visit sleep doctors or hypnotists who would perform sessions to calm their nerves and guide them into a deep, restful slumber. The hypnotist's process usually involved softly gazing into the eyes of the patient and using a calming, rhythmic voice to guide them into a trance. Many Victorians swore by its effectiveness, claiming it not only cured their insomnia, but also relieved a variety of ailments like anxiety and stress. Historians still debate whether mesmerism truly worked or if it was simply the power of suggestion. However, there was no denying that it was incredibly popular, so much so that it began to gain attention in society as an alternative treatment. Interestingly, some critics of mesmerism claimed that it was nothing more than a placebo with no real benefit to the patient. They argued that sleep could simply be achieved by believing in the power of the hypnotist's words, which makes you wonder if the mind's power over the body was much more influential than anyone had imagined. But then again, wasn't the mind always the greatest mystery? Hypnosis wasn't just for curing insomnia. It became a part of everyday Victorian life. Social gatherings even incorporated it. And while the idea of attending a dinner party and being hypnotized to sleep might seem laughable today, it was seen as something novel, and in some circles quite sophisticated. It was in a sense a Victorian luxury, much like the use of lavender sachets, or having a live musician play at your bedside. But, as with many Victorian remedies, the practice of hypnosis wasn't entirely without its controversies. While some swore by its calming effects, others feared the idea of being hypnotized could lead to psychological harm. After all, entrusting someone with the power to control your mind during one of the most vulnerable moments of the day, sleep wasn't something everyone was comfortable with. As hypnosis became more mainstream, the line between real and make-believe became increasingly blurred. People who were skeptical of its benefits were often dismissed as uninformed, while those who embraced it were seen as cutting-edge in their approach to health and well-being. Regardless of its scientific validity, one thing is certain: hypnotic sleep had a hold on the Victorian imagination. But what happens when the common folk turn to something a little less scientific and a bit more superstition-driven? That's where things start to get even more peculiar. As curious as the practice of mesmerism was, the Victorians didn't limit their search for sleep remedies to just scientific methods or hypnotic techniques. No, they were also deeply influenced by a rich array of superstitions and folk beliefs that had been passed down through generations. Some of these beliefs, quite frankly, sound a bit outlandish today. But in the Victorian era, they were taken quite seriously and were thought to hold the key to a good night's sleep. One of the more common superstitions was the belief in the protective power of certain objects, especially during the night. For example, it was widely believed that placing a piece of bread under your pillow would ward off bad dreams. Sounds strange, right? But it's true. Victorians who had trouble sleeping would tuck a small slice of bread under their pillow, hoping it would shield them from nightmares. While the exact reasoning behind this practice is unclear, many believed that the bread, as a humble and simple food, had the power to absorb negativity and prevent bad spirits from invading the dream world. Historians still debate whether this was purely a superstition or if it had roots in ancient protective rituals. It's possible that the Victorians, facing the uncertainties of the Industrial Revolution, felt that they needed something to give them control over their dreams. But imagine being a Victorian child ready to sleep after a long day, and tucking a piece of bread under your pillow just in case. In a world that seemed ever-changing and increasingly out of control, this small ritual provided a sense of comfort and agency in the face of sleep's uncertainties. Bread wasn't the only object that had supernatural significance for sleep, however. There were also widespread beliefs about the power of certain types of stones and crystals. Victorians believed that amethyst in particular could induce peaceful sleep and ward off nightmares. Placing an amethyst stone beneath the pillow or under the bed was thought to encourage restful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether or not the stones worked is still a topic of discussion among historians, but the tradition was certainly widespread in the Victorian era. For those not inclined to use bread or stones, the Victorians also believed that specific sleeping prayers could have an effect. These prayers, often recited before bed, were thought to bring calmness to the mind and help the body relax. People would say a few quiet words, perhaps invoking the aid of angels or ancestors to ensure that their sleep would be free from disturbances. For Victorians who felt disconnected from the modern world's chaos, these rituals offered a direct way to tap into a deeper spiritual realm, a way to make peace with their minds before drifting into sleep. And of course, no discussion of Victorian sleep remedies would be complete without mentioning the ever-popular sleeping potions. These potions were made from various herb spices and sometimes alcohol, and were often sold as a kind of magic elixir to help with sleep. Some of the more common ingredients included valerian root chamomile and lavender, yes, that same lavender we talked about earlier. In a way, these potions served as the 19th century equivalent of modern-day sleep aids. Victorians would consume them before bed in the hopes of easing themselves into a peaceful slumber. While some might have had a mild sedative effect, others were likely little more than placebos, sugary concoctions, designed to lull you into a sense of calm. But the Victorians didn't mind. As long as it worked, they were happy. Historians still debate how effective these sleep potions actually were. Many argue that the real magic was in the belief that these concoctions could help. If you believed a potion would put you to sleep, it might just have the power to do so, thanks to the mind's influence over the body. This would explain why many Victorians were so willing to embrace such remedies, even if they were not scientifically proven to work. While the effectiveness of these remedies remains a subject of discussion, the Victorian penchant for bedtime rituals and superstitions speaks volumes about their desire for control in an otherwise uncontrollable world. With industrialization rapidly changing every aspect of life, sleep was one of the few things that still felt personal. And for many, it was worth any strange ritual or potion to hold on to it. But what happens when you start looking at the physical environments in which people sleep? What role did their surroundings play in all of this? Now that we've delved into the world of superstitions and potions, it's time to take a look at the physical environments that Victorians believed could influence their sleep. If you thought the lavender-scented pillows and bread under the pillow were eccentric, just wait until you hear about their obsession with the perfect bedroom. For Victorians, sleep wasn't just about the ritual. It was about crafting an environment that would invite it in. And that environment. It was often an extravagant, luxurious setting filled with layers of comfort and careful design. Victorian bedrooms were, in a word, elaborate. If you were lucky enough to have a dedicated bedroom, it was likely to be adorned with heavy curtains, thick carpets, and grand furniture, all designed to promote relaxation. The bed itself was a centerpiece of this space. It was far more than a place to sleep, it was a statement of wealth and sophistication. Canopy beds were especially popular, with thick drapes surrounding them to block out any unwanted light or noise, creating an almost cocoon-like atmosphere that was perfect for sleep. The idea was simple. If you could isolate yourself from the distractions of the outside world, you would drift into sleep more easily. In fact, the more layers of comfort you surrounded yourself with, the better your chances were of having a restful night. But it wasn't just the bed that mattered. The room itself had to be arranged in a way that promoted both restfulness and tranquility. Soft, muted colors were chosen for the walls. Think pale blues, greens, and lavenders, chosen not just for their aesthetic appeal but also for their calming effect on the mind. The furniture was carefully selected to create a sense of order and serenity. Bookshelves, chairs, and tables were often arranged in symmetrical patterns, as Victorians believed that a balanced room would lead to a balanced mind, which would in turn lead to better sleep. Historians still debate whether the emphasis on aesthetics had a psychological effect on the Victorians' ability to sleep. Did the carefully curated beauty of the bedroom truly have an impact on their ability to rest? Or was it just another way to show off their wealth? While we may never know for sure, there's no doubt that the Victorians went to great lengths to ensure their sleep environment was conducive to relaxation. For many, the bedroom became a sanctuary, a place where they could escape the chaos of their daily lives and retreat into a peaceful slumber. One fascinating aspect of Victorian bedroom design was the prevalence of the sleeping chamber within larger households. For families of higher social standing, it wasn't enough to simply have a bedroom. No, they often had multiple sleeping chambers, each designated for different family members and purposes. Some of these rooms were even specifically designed for daytime naps, a luxury reserved for those who didn't have to work from dawn until dusk. It's a curious thing, isn't it? The idea that entire rooms were dedicated solely to sleep during the day. These daytime naps were believed to help improve health, reduce stress, and of course aid in getting the proper amount of rest. But what about the poor, you might wonder? Well, for those who lived in the working class, the luxury of a well-appointed bedroom was often out of reach. Instead, many had to make do with shared spaces where privacy and comfort were in short supply. For them, sleep was often a rare commodity, something to be fought for amid the noise and chaos of crowded homes. However, even among the working class, the pursuit of a good night's sleep was something they didn't take lightly. For them, sleep was a hard-won prize, and anything that might aid in achieving it, whether a quiet corner of the house, a makeshift pillow, or a piece of bread under the pillow, was worth trying. While the wealthy could surround themselves with luxurious, sleep-promoting environments, the working-class Victorians had to get creative, often resorting to whatever remedies or techniques they could afford. But despite the differences in living conditions, the goal was the same: restful sleep, free from the worries of the waking world. Whether it was through elaborate rituals, soothing music, or the simple act of retreating into a quiet space, the Victorian obsession with sleep was universal. And now, as we delve further into this fascinating world, let's explore another curious aspect of the Victorian sleep culture: the strange connection between sleep and death. It's a topic that may seem odd at first, but the Victorians had a peculiar view of the boundary between sleep and the final rest. As peculiar as it may seem, the Victorians had a deeply intertwined view of sleep and death, one that often blurred the line between the two. For a society that was no stranger to both death and mourning, this connection between the two states of being was natural, albeit strange by today's standards. After all, the Victorians were living in an era where death was a constant companion, and they had to confront it in all its forms, be it the untimely death of a loved one, the persistent threat of illness, or the reality of aging. The Victorian fascination with sleep and its association with death led to some particularly curious traditions. Many Victorians believed that death was akin to a long, eternal sleep. The metaphor was more than just poetic. It was a comforting idea that helped people come to terms with the loss of those they loved. The idea of eternal rest provided solace, offering an image of death that was gentle and serene rather than frightening. The dead, after all, were simply sleeping until they awoke in the afterlife. It was a deeply spiritual view, one that provided comfort in a time when death was often sudden and untimely. Historians still debate whether this association between sleep and death was a coping mechanism, or a genuine belief in an afterlife that was as peaceful as sleep. Some argue that the idea of death as a final peaceful slumber served to make the reality of mortality less terrifying for Victorians. After all, in an era when diseases like tuberculosis and smallpox could claim lives in an instant, the idea of sleep as a final peaceful destination was a gentle way to cope with the inevitable. In fact, Victorian funeral practices often reflected this view. Bodies were frequently laid out in the home, dressed in their finest clothes and placed in a serene, restful position, as if the deceased were merely taking a nap. The deceased were often surrounded by comforting objects such as their favorite books or sentimental belongings, in the hope that they would be at peace in their final sleep. Family members would often gather by the bedside, keeping a vigil as they whispered prayers and words of comfort, believing that this quiet companionship would ease the deceased into their final rest. The practice of placing mirrors over the faces of the deceased so that they might wake up in the afterlife is another example of how the Victorians viewed sleep and death as two sides of the same coin. The idea was that death, much like sleep, was not an end, but rather a transition. This perspective provided both comfort and meaning to those left behind, giving them hope that their loved ones were simply resting, awaiting the next chapter in a peaceful, eternal slumber. But the connection between sleep and death wasn't just about the deceased. It was also about how the living approached their own sleep. For many Victorians, sleep was a way to prepare for the inevitable. The more peaceful and restful their nights, the more they felt they could face the challenges of life and the eventual certainty of death. Sleep, in this sense, was not only a physical need, but also a spiritual one. It was as if, by achieving a peaceful slumber each night, they were reinforcing the idea that they would be prepared for what lay beyond, whether that be in the quiet of the night or the eternal rest that awaited them. Interestingly, this view of sleep as a preparation for death may have influenced how the Victorians viewed sleep hygiene and bedtime rituals. Their sleep habits were not just about comfort. They were about ensuring a good, peaceful rest so they could face the world with grace and ultimately meet death with acceptance. In this way, sleep was an act of reverence, not just relaxation. It was a way of coming to terms with life's fragility and finding peace in the quiet moments before the inevitable. Of course, not all Victorians were comforted by these thoughts. For some, the connection between sleep and death was a source of anxiety, especially given the prevalence of death and disease during this period. The fear of never waking from sleep or of being caught in an eternal slumber haunted many. As a result, some resorted to elaborate sleep rituals, filling their rooms with scents, playing calming music, or even employing sleeping tonics and potions to ensure that their rest was uninterrupted and peaceful. For them, sleep was not just a nightly reprieve. It was a daily battle against the unsettling thoughts of mortality. So, whether sleep was seen as a gentle escape from life's turmoil or as a final comforting rest, the connection between sleep and death was an inescapable theme in Victorian life. And as we move forward, we'll see how this connection shaped not only their view of sleep, but also their approach to rest itself. But before we delve further into the relationship between sleep and death, let's take a step back and consider how the Victorians approached sleep's most basic, yet most important element, the bed. Now that we've explored the connection between sleep and death in Victorian culture, it's time to turn our attention to the one place where the magic of sleep truly happens, the bed. In the Victorian era, the bed wasn't just a place to lie down and rest, it was a carefully curated space designed to promote relaxation, comfort, and above all, sleep. But what made the Victorian bed so unique? First, let's talk about the bed itself. If you were fortunate enough to live in a wealthy Victorian household, your bed would likely be a grand affair, an elaborate piece of furniture that took center stage in the room. The iconic four-poster bed, with its towering posts and ornate canopy, was a staple in upper-class homes. These beds were designed not only for comfort, but also for display showcasing the family's wealth and social status. A canopy made of rich velvet or silk fabric would hang over the bed, often draped dramatically to create an almost theatrical atmosphere. For the Victorians, the bed was a symbol of luxury and refinement, and it was treated with the utmost care and attention to detail. But it wasn't just about aesthetics. The design of the bed was also rooted in practicality. During the Victorian era, a bed was more than just a surface to sleep on, it was a tool to help with the healing and restorative processes that came with rest. The beds were often outfitted with mattresses filled with down feathers, wool, or even horsehair. These materials were chosen for their ability to provide support and comfort, ensuring that the sleeper could rest undisturbed through the night. In fact, a good mattress was considered a mark of distinction, and families would spend a great deal of money ensuring that their beds were equipped with the finest bedding. For those who didn't have the luxury of a four-poster bed, the working class had to make do with more humble sleeping arrangements. Nevertheless, even the simplest of beds was still regarded as an essential part of the home. A clean, comfortable bed was considered vital for good health and well-being. In fact, the Victorian focus on cleanliness extended to their beds, with many households washing their sheets and blankets regularly, sometimes even using special scents or oils to keep the linens fresh. The idea was that a clean, well-maintained bed could help keep you safe from illness and ensure that you were getting the most restful sleep possible. But while the material comforts of the bed were important, the overall ambiance of the bedroom was just as crucial in ensuring a good night's sleep. As we've seen earlier, the Victorians believed that the physical environment played a huge role in promoting rest. The bedroom, then, was designed to be a sanctuary from the noise and chaos of the outside world. Bedrooms were often situated away from busy areas of the house, and the windows were carefully sealed to block out any light or noise that might disrupt sleep. Thick curtains, sometimes lined with velvet or heavy linen, were drawn tightly each night to create a dark, quiet space for rest. Candles or oil lamps were used to gently light the room, but they were never left burning overnight. In fact, it was common practice to dim the lights well before bed to signal to the body that it was time to wind down. The bedroom was designed to be a peaceful, calming space where you could leave the stress of the day behind and prepare yourself for the comforting embrace of sleep. Historians still debate the exact role that the physical environment played in Victorian sleep habits. Did the luxurious surroundings really promote better sleep? Or was it just a reflection of the period's obsession with comfort and order? Either way, one thing is clear: Victorians believed that sleep was not merely a biological necessity. It was an art form, and the bed was its stage. Every detail was carefully considered to help promote restful slumber, from the type of bedding used to the design of the room itself. As we move further into the world of Victorian sleep, let's take a look at one more element that shaped their approach to rest: the importance of sleep hygiene. While we might think of sleep hygiene today as something that involves avoiding caffeine before bed and keeping a regular sleep schedule, the Victorians had their own set of rules and guidelines for ensuring the quality of their rest. The concept of sleep hygiene in the Victorian era was deeply tied to notions of discipline, cleanliness, and routine. In fact, many of the habits we associate with good sleep today were part of the Victorian approach to rest. For example, regular bedtimes were highly encouraged, with many Victorians believing that going to bed at the same time every night would help regulate the body's internal clock and improve sleep quality. A strict bedtime was seen as essential not just for physical rest, but for maintaining good mental health. As we delve deeper into the Victorian obsession with sleep, we can't overlook the importance they placed on routine, especially when it came to their sleep hygiene. In a world that was rapidly changing due to industrialization, regularity became a comforting anchor in an otherwise unpredictable life. And when it came to sleep, the Victorians believed that the more disciplined you were in your nightly routines, the better your rest would be. For Victorians, going to bed at the same time every night was seen as paramount. It wasn't just about avoiding the chaos of a late-night schedule. It was about adhering to a strict rhythm that would help synchronize the body's natural rhythms. Much like how they meticulously planned their daily activities, their sleep schedules were also carefully organized. This wasn't just a casual recommendation. It was a belief that a lack of sleep discipline could lead to a host of problems from bad moods to deteriorating health. The Victorian approach to sleep was deeply rooted in the idea that the body, like a well-maintained machine, needed regular care and attention. Going to bed at a set time each night was a form of self-care, ensuring that the body's internal clock would remain in sync. But it wasn't just the act of going to bed that mattered. It was also the process leading up to it. The Victorians were keen on creating a relaxing pre-bedtime routine, one that would prepare both the mind and body for rest. After a long day, many would engage in calming activities like reading, writing in journals, or engaging in light conversation. The idea was to slowly wind down, easing into the night in a way that was both physically and mentally soothing. Unlike today's world of constant screens and distractions, Victorian homes were relatively quiet at night. This quietude was an essential part of the process. They believed that a peaceful environment was necessary to prepare for restful sleep. The importance of cleanliness also played a key role in their sleep hygiene. Just as their beds were meticulously prepared, so too were their bodies. A warm bath before bed was considered an essential part of the evening ritual. The Victorians believed that bathing not only cleaned the body, but also relaxed the muscles, helping to prepare for sleep. The bath, often scented with lavender or rose petals, was a comforting way to unwind. In fact, many wealthy Victorians had special bathrooms designed for the purpose of these nightly rituals. The idea of cleanliness extended beyond just the body. It was about creating a sanctified space for rest, free from the impurities of the day. Another key element of Victorian sleep hygiene was the use of night clothes. While today we might throw on a pair of pajamas or simply sleep in our undergarments, the Victorians had an entire wardrobe dedicated to their nightly rest. Sleepwear was often made of fine cotton or linen with delicate lace and embroidery that spoke to the Victorian penchant for elegance and luxury. A properly attired Victorian didn't just sleep, they indulged in the luxury of rest. And it wasn't just the rich who practiced this. Many middle-class families also adhered to these rituals, albeit with simpler fabrics and designs. The nightly routine, complete with proper attire, was considered an essential part of ensuring that sleep wasn't just restorative, but also refined. Historians still debate how much of these strict sleep practices were born out of the Victorian obsession with discipline and propriety, versus their genuine desire for better health. Regardless, it's clear that they viewed sleep as more than just a natural process. It was a skill that needed to be perfected. And in perfecting it, they believed they could enhance their health, their mental clarity, and ultimately their well-being. The Victorians were a people who believed in order and structure in all things, and this extended to the act of sleep. The idea that the quality of your rest could be improved through disciplined habits was at the core of their approach to sleep hygiene. But the story doesn't end with the Victorians simply going to bed early and bathing before sleep. There was also a belief that their dreams played a significant role in their health and well-being. Much like the rest of their rituals, the Victorians saw the dream world as something that had to be controlled or guided. In fact, dream interpretation became a popular topic of discussion during this time, and many Victorians took great interest in understanding the meaning behind their dreams. They believed that dreams were not just random or fleeting. They were a window into the subconscious mind, and could provide valuable insights into one's mental and emotional state. As we shift from the physical rituals of preparing for sleep, let's delve into one of the more fascinating aspects of Victorian sleep culture, the importance they placed on dreams. For the Victorians, sleep was not just an escape from the waking world. It was a realm to explore, interpret, and understand. dreams were believed to be much more than the random, fragmented thoughts we often dismiss today. Instead, they were seen as windows to the soul, offering glimpses into one's subconscious mind and emotions. The Victorians were fascinated by the idea that dreams could reveal hidden truths about a person's psyche. Drawing inspiration from ancient traditions and early psychological theories, they believed that analyzing dreams could help uncover desires, fears, and unresolved conflicts. This led to the rise of a Victorian pastime that, while perhaps not as widespread as today's interest in dream journals, was still quite popular among those seeking a deeper understanding of their own mind's dream interpretation. Victorian dream interpretation was rooted in both spiritual and psychological beliefs. Many Victorians turned to dream dictionaries books that offered explanations for common dream symbols. These books were filled with lists of dreams, and their supposed meanings providing guidance for interpreting everything from flying dreams to falling dreams. For example, dreaming of falling was often interpreted as a sign of insecurity or a fear of losing control, while dreams of flying were seen as symbols of freedom or a desire to escape. These interpretations were taken seriously by many, and people would often seek advice from a trusted friend or family member if they had particularly vivid or troubling dreams. But not all dream interpretations were as straightforward as these symbolic meanings. The Victorians also believed that certain dreams could be prophetic, that they held messages from beyond the grave or glimpses into the future. This belief in prophetic dreams was particularly strong during times of uncertainty, such as the rise of industrialization and the increasing social changes of the era. With so many aspects of life changing rapidly, it's no wonder that many looked to their dreams for guidance and reassurance. Some Victorians even turned to spiritualists or mediums to interpret their dreams, seeking answers about their futures or messages from deceased loved ones. Historians still debate whether this deep interest in dream interpretation was part of the Victorian obsession with control, or whether it was an attempt to make sense of a rapidly changing world. Some argue that the Victorians were simply looking for stability and meaning in a world that was becoming more unpredictable. Others suggest that their fascination with dreams was rooted in a growing interest in psychology, as early theories of the subconscious were beginning to emerge. Either way, one thing is clear: dreams were an integral part of the Victorian sleep experience, and they were taken seriously. Beyond interpretation, the Victorians also placed great importance on how one prepared for sleep in order to have peaceful, positive dreams. For example, many believed that reading a book or engaging in light conversation before bed could influence the nature of one's dreams. The idea was that if your mind was relaxed and calm before sleep, it would lead to more pleasant dreams. Conversely, engaging in stressful or disturbing activities before bed, like reading upsetting news or having an argument, was believed to result in nightmares or restless sleep. To ensure that their dreams were as peaceful as possible, Victorians would sometimes perform rituals before bed. One such ritual involved placing a small token such as a piece of jewelry or a loved one's photograph under their pillow. This was believed to protect them from bad dreams and to invite positive, healing dreams into their sleep. It was a simple act, but one that symbolized the Victorian need to have control over every aspect of their rest. Interestingly, the idea of good dreams was closely linked to the Victorian perception of health. Just as sleep itself was considered an essential component of good health, so too were positive dreams seen as a reflection of one's mental and emotional well-being. The Victorians were deeply concerned with maintaining balance in their lives. Balance between work and rest, between public duty and private life, and they extended this desire for balance into their dreams. Dreams, in their view, were not just random occurrences, but reflections of a well-balanced mind. Historians still debate whether the Victorians' fixation on dreams was a result of their cultural context or an early form of psychological inquiry. Either way, the emphasis on dreams reveals just how deeply the Victorians valued sleep, not only as a physical necessity, but also as a mental and emotional experience. Sleep, to them, was a way of navigating the complexities of the human mind, a journey that could reveal hidden truths and offer respite from the trials of daily life. As we begin to move toward the final stages of our exploration into Victorian sleep practices, it's important to remember that sleep wasn't merely about rest. It was a complete experience that touched every aspect of their lives, from their physical rituals to their spiritual beliefs. The Victorians worked hard to create the perfect sleep environment, and they believed that the quality of their sleep was directly linked to their overall health and happiness. Now that we've explored how the Victorians viewed dreams and their nightly rituals, let's take a closer look at another significant aspect of Victorian sleep culture, the role of rest during the day. While we often think of sleep as something reserved for the nighttime, the Victorians, especially among the wealthier classes, valued naps as an essential part of their daily routines. In fact, napping was seen as a way to refresh the mind and body, ensuring that individuals could tackle the challenges of the day with renewed energy. And while today napping might be seen as an indulgence or a luxury during the Victorian era, it was considered an important and even necessary practice for maintaining good health. For the Victorians, a midday nap wasn't just a casual rest. It was a deliberate, almost sacred part of the daily routine, particularly among those who had the leisure time to partake in it. During the height of the Industrial Revolution, the working class didn't have the luxury of time for afternoon naps, but for the wealthy, naps were an integral part of life. The belief was that a nap could help maintain mental clarity, reduce stress, and improve productivity. Whether in the form of a short rest after lunch or a more extended period of sleep in the afternoon, taking time for a nap was seen as a healthy way to recharge. Victorian physicians also supported the idea of napping, encouraging people to rest for a short period during the day to help prevent fatigue and maintain physical and mental well-being. In a society that was so focused on work industry and achievement, napping was almost a revolutionary act, one that challenged the idea of constant productivity. It was an acknowledgement that rest was just as important as work for overall health. In addition to promoting mental clarity, the Victorians also believed that naps had physical benefits. Doctors often recommended that people, especially those who were ill or recovering from an injury, take naps as a part of their healing process. Naps were thought to help the body regain strength, encourage circulation, and aid in the digestive process. So, while the upper class might have had more time for naps, the practice was seen as a way to boost one's health no matter their social standing. However, the Victorians weren't always in favor of taking naps at any time. They were a people deeply rooted in discipline and routine, so naps had to be taken with a sense of order. There were specific times during the day when naps were acceptable, and if you were caught napping outside of these times, it was considered a sign of weakness or poor self-control. A proper Victorian would never nap during the morning or early afternoon when they should be working or engaging in productive activities. Instead, naps were reserved for the early to mid-afternoon, often after a heavy lunch. As with all things Victorian, napping also had a social element to it. The wealthy classes had specially designed restrooms where they could retire after lunch for a short nap. These rooms were carefully arranged to provide the most restful environment possible, quiet, dark, and free of distractions. The beds or lounge chairs in these rooms were often lined with soft cushions, and the air was filled with the scent of lavender, which, as we've already seen, was a common sleep aid. The idea was that by retreating to this restful space, one could ensure the nap would be as refreshing as possible, leaving the body and mind rejuvenated for the rest of the day. Of course, the Victorians also viewed the act of sleeping, whether during the day or night, as a way to indulge in some much-needed privacy. In a time when public life was often filled with societal expectations, the bedroom or the nap room was a private space where one could withdraw from the pressures of the outside world. For the Victorians, sleep and naps weren't just about physical rest, they were also a form of mental escape. A brief break from the societal roles and responsibilities that weighed heavily on their shoulders. Historians still debate whether the Victorians' emphasis on napping was driven more by their need to adhere to social norms, or if it was genuinely a method for improving health. Regardless of the reasons, it's clear that the Victorians believed in the power of rest to enhance the quality of life. For them, sleep wasn't something to be rushed or dismissed. It was a process to be respected and carefully cultivated. As we continue to explore the Victorian approach to sleep, let's not forget that their desire for rest was intertwined with their broader pursuit of balance between work and leisure activity, and relaxation, the mind and the body. Sleep, for them, was about more than just recovering from exhaustion. It was about maintaining harmony in all aspects of life. And, as we approach the end of this journey into Victorian sleep, it's worth reflecting on how their obsession with rest has shaped our modern understanding of sleep today. Are we too seeking that same balance? As we come to the final stretch of our journey through the Victorian world of sleep, it's time to reflect on how their approach to rest has shaped our modern understanding of sleep and its importance in daily life. The Victorians, in their endless pursuit of balance and self-care, were among the first to emphasize the significance of a proper sleep environment, routine, and hygiene. Today, we continue to benefit from these insights, albeit with more modern technologies, and a greater understanding of the science behind sleep. One area in which the Victorians were particularly forward-thinking was their understanding of the mind-body connection. They were among the first to truly recognize that good sleep didn't just mean physical rest, it was deeply tied to mental well-being. The Victorians believed that sleep had the power to restore not only the body, but the mind as well. This idea laid the foundation for what we know today about the importance of sleep for emotional health, memory, and cognitive function. In many ways, the Victorian focus on sleep hygiene mirrors our modern understanding of the importance of creating an ideal sleep environment. Just as they emphasized the need for a quiet, dark room and comfortable bedding, we now know that the physical environment is crucial for achieving high-quality sleep. Today, we invest in blackout curtains, noise machines, and ergonomic mattresses, all things that the Victorians might have approved of had they lived in our time. Moreover, the Victorian obsession with routine and consistency in sleep is something that modern sleep experts continue to advocate. Establishing a regular sleep schedule, going to bed at the same time each night, and avoiding stimulating activities before bed are all practices that align with Victorian ideals. Their belief in the importance of bedtime rituals to calm the mind has since evolved into the modern understanding of how crucial winding down is for a restful night's sleep. Whether through reading, relaxing music, or quiet reflection, the essence of these Victorian rituals still influences how we approach our sleep today. But there's another aspect of Victorian sleep culture that resonates with us in the present: the role of sleep in overall well-being. The Victorians understood that sleep was not simply a luxury or an afterthought, it was a vital part of life that needed to be treated with care and respect. They saw sleep as a tool for maintaining balance in life, a way to recover from the stresses and strains of the day, and a necessary practice for both physical and mental health. In today's world, where sleep is often sacrificed in favor of busy schedules and constant activity, the Victorian approach serves as a reminder of the importance of rest. We live in a society that often prizes productivity above all else. But the Victorians knew that without proper sleep, our bodies and minds couldn't function to their fullest potential. They valued sleep, not just as a biological necessity, but as a cornerstone of a healthy, balanced life. As we continue to explore the relationship between sleep and health, we also have to acknowledge that sleep for many can still be elusive. Modern issues like insomnia, stress, and technology-induced disruptions to sleep are challenges that the Victorians never had to face. However, their emphasis on sleep hygiene and the rituals that accompanied bedtime can still offer valuable guidance for those seeking to improve their sleep today. The Victorian obsession with sleep was not just about avoiding fatigue or escaping the demands of life, it was about nurturing a fundamental need that they believed was essential to living a good, balanced life. While many of their sleep practices may seem strange or overly ritualistic, by today's standards, the underlying message is timeless. Sleep is sacred. It's worth prioritizing, planning for, and respecting as a crucial part of life's rhythm. In that sense, the Victorian approach to sleep might have been a bit ahead of its time, and its echoes continue to influence how we approach rest in our modern world. As we come to the end of this journey through the strange and fascinating world of Victorian sleep culture, let's remember that despite all the odd remedies and peculiar practices, the Victorians had it right about one thing. Rest is essential, and it should be treated with the care and attention it deserves. So, whether you're tucking yourself into bed with a lavender sachet, or simply trying to turn off your phone at a reasonable hour, the Victorian emphasis on rest routine and care offers us timeless lessons on how to embrace the art of sleep. As we reach the final leg of our exploration into the realm of Victorian sleep habits, it's time to reflect on how these cultural practices shaped both their society and their understanding of the human need for rest. Though many of their remedies and ideas might seem peculiar, by modern standards, there's no denying that the Victorians were pioneers in recognizing the deep connection between sleep health and overall well-being. Looking back, we see how the Victorians' obsession with sleep wasn't just about seeking comfort or indulgence, it was about finding order in a world that was rapidly changing. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, people were working longer hours, and cities were becoming crowded with the noise and chaos of modern life. Amid this turmoil, sleep became a sanctuary, a moment of peace and quiet that people desperately needed to recharge and regain their strength. But it wasn't just about escaping the world. Sleep was seen as an essential tool for living a balanced life, one that allowed people to function at their best, both physically and mentally. In many ways, the Victorian approach to sleep was revolutionary. They were among the first to treat sleep not as an afterthought, but as a crucial part of a person's daily routine. Their focus on creating optimal environments for sleep, such as darkened rooms, soothing sounds, and comfortable bedding, laid the foundation for modern sleep science. While they didn't have access to the advanced technologies and research we do today, their understanding of the importance of rest was grounded in practical wisdom and intuition. Perhaps the most enduring lesson we can take from the Victorians is the idea that sleep is not just a biological function. It's a deeply personal experience that deserves attention and respect. The Victorians saw sleep as a form of self-care, a practice that could restore not just the body, but also the mind. In a time when people were under immense pressure to succeed, sleep was one of the few things they could control. It was a space where they could retreat, rejuvenate, and find solace. Today, as we navigate the demands of our fast-paced, always connected world, the Victorian approach to sleep offers us a gentle reminder we need to prioritize rest. In the same way that the Victorians set aside time for naps, evening rituals, and a peaceful sleep environment, we must create our own routines that help us disconnect from the stresses of the day. Whether it's through reading a book, practicing relaxation techniques, or simply ensuring our bedrooms are serene and comfortable, the lessons from the past remain relevant today. In the end, the true value of the Victorian obsession with sleep lies in the way it encourages us to take sleep seriously. It reminds us that sleep is not just a passive activity. It's an essential part of our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. The Victorians might have had some quirky ideas, but their emphasis on rest as a vital part of a well-rounded life still rings true. Sleep, they believed, was not something to be rushed or overlooked. It was an art, a practice, and a privilege. So, as you settle into bed tonight, think about how you might be able to embrace some of these Victorian sleep habits. Maybe you'll try a bit of lavender on your pillow, or set aside time for a relaxing bedtime ritual. Whatever you choose, remember that sleep is more than just a need. It's an opportunity to care for yourself and restore your mind and body for the challenges of the day ahead. And, as the Victorians would surely agree, that is a luxury worth pursuing. As we conclude our journey through the Victorian world of sleep, it's clear that the Victorians had a unique and deeply thoughtful approach to rest, one that resonates in many ways with our modern understanding of sleep. While we've touched on their obsession with rituals, the importance of an optimal sleep environment, and their fascination with the spiritual and psychological aspects of rest, there's one more thing we need to explore: how these sleep practices influenced their broader cultural values and the society they built. The Victorian obsession with sleep was not just about personal health. It was also connected to broader societal expectations. The period was defined by an intense focus on propriety discipline and order values that were reflected in how Victorians approached nearly every aspect of their lives, from their work to their leisure time. Sleep was no exception. In a society that demanded strict adherence to routine, maintaining a disciplined sleep schedule became a symbol of self-control and moral virtue. Those who could manage their sleep, follow bedtime rituals, and wake up refreshed were seen as responsible, capable individuals who could balance the demands of life with grace. But sleep also became a way of marking social status. The wealthy, with their grand four-poster beds, luxurious linens, and dedicated sleep spaces, enjoyed a level of comfort and care that was not accessible to the working class. For the elite, sleep was a privilege, a luxury that reflected their social standing. Meanwhile, for the working class, sleep was often a necessity born of exhaustion rather than a chosen act of self-care. Despite the differences in how sleep was experienced, the Victorians as a whole saw it as something important, something that needed attention and respect. This sense of respect for sleep was tied to the broader Victorian worldview, which valued both the body and the mind. They understood that sleep was not just a way to rest the body, but a way to maintain mental and emotional balance. Sleep, in this sense, became a means of self-preservation. If you didn't take the time to rest and recover, you couldn't function properly in the face of daily challenges. For the Victorians who lived through rapid social and industrial changes, Sleep was a way to preserve their sense of stability and control. Interestingly, the Victorians also viewed sleep as a reflection of character. Those who could sleep soundly and maintain a regular disciplined sleep routine were seen as virtuous, while those who struggled with sleep or indulged in excessive rest were often viewed with suspicion. There was a moral dimension to sleep that went beyond the physiological need for rest. A lack of sleep was sometimes seen as a sign of poor character, mental instability, or moral weakness. This idea persisted through the Victorian period and influenced how sleep disorders were perceived. But beyond this moral framework, sleep also became a subject of fascination and study. The rise of sleep medicine during the Victorian era was in many ways a response to these societal pressures. The growing awareness of sleep disorders, insomnia, and the development of treatments for these conditions reflect the period's broader interest in the scientific understanding of the body and mind. The idea that sleep could be studied, measured, and improved was revolutionary at the time, and laid the groundwork for the field of sleep science as we know it today. One of the most lasting legacies of the Victorian approach to sleep is their emphasis on the importance of routines. Today, we recognize the value of maintaining consistent sleep patterns and establishing a calming pre-sleep ritual to improve the quality of our rest. While the methods may have changed no longer, do we rely on port or cold compresses, the principle remains the same. Sleep is something to be nurtured and cared for. The Victorians understood that sleep was an active process, not a passive one, and that creating the right environment for rest was essential for a healthy and balanced life. As we move forward into a world that's ever more fast-paced and connected, we can take inspiration from the Victorians in how we prioritize and approach sleep. They may have had their peculiar practices and beliefs, but they also had a deep understanding of the value of rest, routine, and ritual. In our modern world, where sleep is often sidelined in favor of productivity and constant connectivity, the Victorian approach reminds us to slow down, embrace rest, and prioritize self-care. As you lie down tonight, perhaps you'll take a moment to reflect on the care that the Victorians gave to their sleep rituals. Whether you indulge in a bit of lavender, a relaxing book, or simply the quiet comfort of your bed, know that you're continuing a long tradition of valuing the importance of sleep. After all, the Victorians understood something we still know today. Sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity. As we draw to a close in our exploration of Victorian sleep practices, it's worth pausing for a moment to reflect on how far we've come, and how much of their obsession with rest continues to echo through modern life. Though we no longer rely on lavender sachets, port, or hypnotic seances to ensure a good night's sleep, the core principles that shaped Victorian sleep culture remain ever relevant. In many ways, the Victorians laid the foundation for much of what we know today about the importance of rest, and their obsession with sleep was far ahead of its time. Today, as sleep science continues to evolve, we are discovering more and more about the complex relationship between sleep and overall health. We know that poor sleep can lead to a range of physical and mental health problems, from heart disease to anxiety. The Victorians, though they lacked the technology and scientific understanding that we now possess, were keenly aware of the profound impact that sleep had on well-being. They understood that sleep wasn't just a break from the demands of daily life. It was a vital function that needed to be respected and protected. And while their methods may seem strange to us today, the underlying belief that sleep is essential for maintaining a balanced, healthy life is something that still rings true. One of the most important lessons the Victorians can teach us is the idea of prioritizing rest. In a world where productivity is often revered above all else, it's easy to overlook the simple yet profound importance of sleep. We push ourselves to work longer hours, stay awake for late-night meetings, and sacrifice sleep in the name of achievement. The Victorians, in contrast, understood that in order to truly thrive, one had to rest. Whether it was the calming rituals of bedtime or the luxury of a midday nap, they knew that sleep wasn't just a luxury, it was an essential part of life. It's a reminder that taking care of ourselves through rest is just as important as any other form of self-care. In the modern world, we've also learned the importance of creating an optimal sleep environment, something the Victorians excelled at. The quiet, darkened rooms, the soft bedding, and the careful rituals were all part of creating a space that invited rest. Today, we have an entire industry built around sleep optimization mattresses, sleep trackers, blackout curtains, white noise machines. These innovations, while far more advanced than the simple methods used by the Victorians, share the same fundamental goal: to create an environment where rest can be deeply restorative. And yet, even with all our modern advancements, we still struggle with sleep. The constant demands of modern life, the lure of screens, and the pressures of an always-on society make it difficult for many to get the kind of sleep that the Victorians prized so highly. But perhaps as we look back at their sleep rituals and routines, we can learn to slow down, prioritize our rest, and create environments that nurture sleep in the same way the Victorians did. The Victorian focus on routine also holds great significance today. We know that establishing consistent sleep patterns is one of the best ways to improve sleep quality. Yet, many of us are guilty of disregarding our sleep schedules in favor of staying up late or waking up at irregular times. Just as the Victorians believed in the power of a structured routine to regulate their rest, we too can benefit from maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, creating a rhythm that helps our bodies recognize when it's time to rest. Perhaps the most profound legacy the Victorians left us is their respect for the art of sleep. They didn't just see sleep as a passive necessity. They viewed it as an active part of life, something to be cultivated, cherished, and respected. In our busy, overstimulated world, it's easy to forget that sleep is not just about getting enough hours, but about the quality of that sleep. The Victorians understood this better than most, treating sleep as a sacred practice that demanded attention and care. As you prepare for rest tonight, take a moment to consider the Victorian approach to sleep. Maybe you'll light a candle, arrange your pillows just so, or say a quiet prayer for peaceful rest. Or maybe you'll just allow yourself the simple pleasure of lying down, letting go of the day, and embracing the quiet darkness. Either way, know that just like the Victorians before us, we all have the ability to craft a peaceful, restorative sleep environment, one that nurtures both the body and the mind. And so, as we say good night, let us carry forward the Victorian legacy of sleep. A legacy that reminds us that sleep in all its forms is not just about rest. It's about nurturing our health, restoring our bodies, and finding balance in the quiet moments before the dawn. When it comes to sleep, there's one thing that Victorians couldn't do without in their sleeping spaces: light. But it wasn't the harsh, glaring light we might think of today. It was soft, warm light that was carefully controlled to ensure that sleep wouldn't be disturbed. If you were part of Victorian society, sleeping in complete darkness might not have been your first choice. Instead, the light from candles or oil lamps played a critical role in setting the ideal environment for sleep. The Victorians believed that light could regulate their sleep in ways we can't easily imagine. Unlike modern times where we try to block out every trace of light before sleep, Victorians used light as a tool to ease them into slumber. They believed that dim, gentle light had the ability to soothe the mind and prepare the body for the restful transition into sleep. While complete darkness may have been a goal for some, soft, controlled lighting was more integral in helping them unwind and avoid the restless state of mind that could arise from a sudden plunge into darkness. The use of candles and oil lamps wasn't just about illumination. It was about creating an ambiance. The flickering light of a candle was far more than practical. It was part of a carefully constructed ritual. Candles were often used as part of the winding down process before sleep, allowing the mind to calm and transition from the chaos of the day to the quiet of night. Whether in a formal parlor or the bedroom, the presence of soft light helped the Victorians feel less anxious, even as the world outside became darker and quieter. Historians still debate whether this reliance on soft light before sleep actually had a physiological impact on the Victorian mind. Modern sleep experts now know that light, especially blue light, can inhibit the production of melatonin, the hormone responsible for regulating sleep. While Victorians didn't have access to this scientific knowledge, their instinctive use of softer, warmer lighting likely played a role in their ability to rest. The flicker of a candle might not have been as disruptive to sleep patterns as the bright lights of the modern world. Even in the age of gas lamps, they understood that the transition between the active day and restful night required a certain level of subtlety. Victorians, especially in wealthier homes, employed thick curtains, velvet drapes, or even shades to block out the street lights or the early morning light that would otherwise intrude upon their rest. These curtains weren't just for decoration. They were a barrier that ensured that their sleep wouldn't be disturbed by the outside world. Imagine a bedroom, softly lit by a candle, the gentle glow setting the mood for a quiet night. The room would have been filled with the scent of lavender, a calming influence in its own right, and the room would have been dark enough to block out any unwanted light, even while the rest of the world outside buzzed with activity. But light wasn't just about the physical environment, it had a psychological impact as well. As the Victorians began to understand the link between the mind and body, they saw light as a tool to control the transition between the two states. Bright, harsh lights would not be conducive to sleep because they kept the mind active and engaged. Soft light, on the other hand, allowed the body to wind down in preparation for the act of sleeping. The very act of dimming the lights and settling into a quiet space was as important as any physical preparation for sleep. In fact, their understanding of light and sleep was part of a broader desire to control every aspect of their lives, from their routines to their environment. For the Victorians, sleep wasn't just a biological function, it was an art to be perfected. Whether it was the temperature of the room, the scent of lavender in the air, or the carefully controlled light that bathed the room, each detail was part of a larger ritual designed to create the perfect conditions for rest. There was an elegance to their approach that wasn't about luxury, but rather about the importance of sleep as a critical part of life. It was seen as an essential component of both physical and mental well-being, one that needed to be carefully nurtured. Beyond the literal light in the room, there was also an emotional and cultural aspect to the Victorians' use of light in sleep. The warmth of a candle or the glow of an oil lamp was symbolic. It was a way of marking the end of the day and preparing for a peaceful night. The Victorians understood that to sleep well, one had to create an environment where the mind could calm and transition. Their use of light was a ritual of setting boundaries between work and rest, between the daytime and the night. The flickering light of the candles was a boundary between activity and sleep, signaling that it was time to let go of the cares of the day. And while light played an essential role, It wasn't only about the bedroom setting itself, it extended to the larger concept of sleep hygiene. Historians argue that the Victorians' emphasis on a controlled, relaxed environment for sleep was one of the first instances of what we now call sleep hygiene. It wasn't just about what you did during the day, it was about how you prepared for rest. The Victorians knew that a carefully structured routine, including controlling the lighting, helped the mind and body prepare for rest. Even their pre-bedtime rituals, such as dimming the lights, reading a calming book, or taking a warm bath, were designed to encourage sleep in ways that we still advocate today. Interestingly, the Victorians' use of light for sleep wasn't just restricted to the home. As the Industrial Revolution brought longer workdays and more nighttime activity, there was growing interest in how artificial light could affect the body's ability to sleep. While the working class didn't have the luxury of retreating to a lavish bedroom with soft lighting, they still understood the importance of winding down at night. The working class would often use simple tricks to create a more restful environment, such as covering their windows with heavy curtains or using dim lamps for evening tasks. Of course, we know today that the light from screens such as the blue light emitted from phones, computers, and televisions disrupts sleep patterns by interfering with melatonin production. While Victorians were unaware of these scientific facts, they understood the importance of regulating light in ways that still resonate with us today. The use of gentle, warm light combined with their structured routines ensured that the mind was soothed, the body was relaxed, and sleep could take its course. Historians still debate whether the Victorian approach to light before sleep was solely rooted in the practicality of limiting distractions, or whether it was more about creating a psychological space for rest. Regardless, it's clear that they understood the importance of a gentle transition into sleep, a process that continues to influence modern sleep science. As we continue to navigate our modern, always connected lives, the Victorian approach to sleep and light remains a poignant reminder of the need to create an environment conducive to rest. The simple ritual of dimming the lights, calming the mind, and retreating to a peaceful space is as relevant now as it was in the Victorian era. Whether through candles, soft lamps, or the careful use of modern technologies, we can still apply the same principles they embraced to help us create the ideal conditions for sleep. Now that we've explored the delicate balance of light in Victorian sleep culture, let's turn our attention to another essential part of their sleep environment, the bed itself. The bed for Victorians was not merely a piece of furniture, it was the very symbol of comfort, luxury, and personal well-being. A well-made bed, adorned with fine linens and a carefully constructed mattress, was seen as the centerpiece of a restful night's sleep. But it wasn't just about the material comfort. The bed represented a space where the physical and emotional components of rest could be nurtured. Victorian beds were often large and opulent, especially in the homes of the wealthy. The iconic four-poster bed, with its tall wooden posts and draping canopy, was a common feature in upper-class households. These beds weren't just for sleeping, they were works of art. The bed could be made from fine mahogany, intricately carved and polished to perfection, and draped with rich fabrics like velvet or silk. The canopy, often heavy and luxurious, could be pulled shut around the bed, creating an intimate, private cocoon of sleep. This design wasn't just for show. The canopy was also practical, serving to block out light and drafts, creating the ideal environment for sleep. For the wealthiest Victorians, the bed was much more than a place to rest. It was a symbol of status and privilege. The materials used were of the finest quality, from the plush mattresses stuffed with feathers or horsehair to the delicate linens and elaborate quilts. These were items not everyone could afford, and they were part of the larger Victorian obsession with creating a comfortable, well-ordered environment in the home. The bed was seen as the place where one could retreat from the stresses of the world and be surrounded by comfort and luxury. However, not everyone had access to such elaborate bedding. For the working class, the ideal of a four-poster bed with satin sheets was a distant dream. But even so, sleep was still considered an essential part of life for them. While their beds might have been far simpler, they still took great care in ensuring their rest. Many working-class Victorians would invest in the best mattresses they could afford, even if that meant saving for a longer period of time. Even in humble homes, a proper bed was a point of pride. It wasn't just about luxury, though. The Victorians believed that the design and arrangement of the bed could have a profound impact on the quality of sleep. In fact, the idea of a proper sleeping posture was central to their understanding of rest. While we today are familiar with ergonomic pillows and memory foam mattresses, the Victorians were equally focused on how to create the best possible sleeping position. They knew that a body properly supported while sleeping would wake up feeling refreshed, and they spent a great deal of time finding the right arrangement to suit their needs. One essential component of Victorian bedding was the mattress. In a time before modern foam and springs mattresses were made from natural materials, such as horsehair cotton or feathers. The quality of these materials was of the utmost importance, as a poor mattress could result in a restless night and even long-term health problems. The wealthy could afford the finest mattresses while others made do with what they could afford. Many working-class Victorians slept on straw mattresses, but even those were carefully maintained, often being stuffed and fluffed to ensure comfort. The linens were equally important. Victorian beds were often adorned with fine, freshly laundered sheets and blankets. The cleanliness of the bed was paramount, as it was believed that a clean bed would promote better health and better sleep. Bed linens were washed frequently, sometimes as often as once a week, to keep them fresh and free from the germs that might disrupt sleep. Many homes also employed chambermaids, whose sole responsibility was to ensure the cleanliness of the bedding. But it wasn't just the bed that mattered. It was also the ritual of preparing the bed for sleep. In Victorian homes, the process of preparing for bed was a deliberate, almost ceremonial act. The curtains were drawn, the room was made as dark and quiet as possible, and the bed was carefully arranged with pillows and blankets. The process wasn't rushed. It was a slow, soothing ritual designed to ease the mind and body into a restful state. This ritual was not just for the wealthy. Even the working-class Victorians understood the importance of creating a comfortable, restful environment for sleep. The pillows themselves played a crucial role in this process. Victorian pillows, often filled with down feathers or soft cotton, were carefully arranged to ensure comfort. Some wealthier households even had specially designed pillowcases made from fine linen or satin, offering not only comfort, but a sense of luxury. Pillows were seen as more than just functional items. They were part of the overall design of the bed and the sleep experience. In fact, some Victorians believed that the proper arrangement of pillows could enhance sleep quality, ensuring that the neck and head were properly supported throughout the night. But beyond all the physical aspects, there was a psychological component to the Victorian approach to sleep. The bed was seen as a sanctuary, a place where one could retreat from the pressures of daily life and restore both the body and the mind. The carefully constructed sleep space was designed to provide not just physical comfort, but a sense of emotional security. In the midst of a world that was rapidly changing, the bed represented a space where order, tranquility, and comfort could be found. Victorians believed that a restful night's sleep was essential for maintaining health, energy, and emotional well-being. And while they may not have known the scientific principles behind sleep hygiene as we do today, they understood intuitively that creating a peaceful and comfortable sleep environment was essential for achieving this goal. Historians still debate the significance of Victorian bed design and how much it influenced sleep quality. Some argue that the luxurious nature of the bed was a reflection of the era's emphasis on comfort and status, while others believe that these designs were genuinely created with the goal of promoting the best possible sleep. Regardless of the reasons, the elaborate beds and bedding arrangements that characterized the Victorian era were an essential part of their approach to sleep, and they left a legacy that continues to influence our own understanding of sleep and rest today. As we continue exploring the unique and intricate sleep practices of the Victorians, let's turn to another fascinating aspect of their culture, the role of bedtime stories. Today, bedtime stories are often associated with children as a soothing ritual to help them drift off to sleep. But in Victorian times, the tradition of storytelling before bed was not only for children, it was deeply ingrained in the culture of the entire family. The Victorians recognized the power of a good story to ease the mind, calm the body, and make the transition into sleep smoother. The tradition of storytelling before bed was not just about entertainment. Stories, especially those passed down through generations, were seen as an essential part of creating a peaceful atmosphere at night. It wasn't uncommon for families to gather in the evening after dinner to listen to a story read aloud. In wealthier households, this might involve a governess or tutor reading from books of poetry or literature. For the working class, storytelling often took on a more informal tone, with family members sharing tales, personal anecdotes, or even ghost stories, an especially popular genre in Victorian homes. These bedtime stories played a significant role in helping individuals and families unwind after a long day. In a world where life could be overwhelming, especially with the rapid industrial changes happening, these stories allowed people to escape even briefly from the stresses of the real world. The content of the stories could vary from whimsical and fantastical to moral and educational. For children, fairy tales and fables were commonly told, often imparting lessons on virtues such as kindness, honesty, and bravery. But for adults, stories could range from literary classics to the occasional ghost tale, an ever-popular genre in Victorian society. The tradition of bedtime stories was not limited to literature alone. Victorians often enjoyed oral storytelling, the telling of personal experiences or family history passed down through generations. These stories often revolved around personal triumphs, struggles, or moral lessons. Family members would gather around the hearth telling tales as the fire crackled with the warmth and comfort of the evening, providing the perfect setting for these narratives. For many, this ritual was a way to bond with family members and create lasting memories. In the Victorian era, ghost stories were especially popular during the colder months. The eerie atmosphere of winter, with its long dark nights, provided the ideal backdrop for spooky tales. Ghost stories were often shared at bedtime, and they became an important part of the Victorian sleep culture. These stories were told to invoke fear, but also to create a sense of comfort. After all, despite the spookiness of the tales, they were told in the safety of one's home, often accompanied by the warmth of a fire and the company of loved ones. The contrast between fear and safety made ghost stories an integral part of Victorian bedtime rituals. One of the most notable aspects of bedtime stories during the Victorian period was the moral component. Victorians were deeply concerned with moral education, and they believed that stories had the power to shape character and guide children toward virtuous lives. Many bedtime stories contained clear moral lessons, and parents would use storytelling as a tool to teach their children about the importance of virtues such as hard work, honesty, and perseverance. Even fairy tales, which were often fantastical in nature, included these lessons, reinforcing the idea that good behavior would eventually be rewarded and evil would be punished. While bedtime stories were seen as a comforting way to prepare for sleep, they also had a psychological function. For children, stories helped them process their emotions and fears. Many Victorian children were terrified of the dark or of imaginary creatures that might lurk under the bed. A soothing, reassuring story before bed could ease these fears, helping them feel safe and secure. The predictability and routine of hearing a bedtime story every night also helped children develop a sense of stability and security, which is crucial for emotional development. For adults, storytelling was just as important. The demands of Victorian society, especially for women who were often expected to manage the household, raise children, and adhere to rigid social expectations, could be overwhelming. A bedtime story allowed adults to momentarily escape from their daily responsibilities, transporting them to a world of imagination and adventure. Whether the stories were light-hearted or introspective, they provided a brief but welcome respite from the burdens of daily life. In addition to the emotional benefits, bedtime stories were also seen as intellectual nourishment. Reading aloud and listening to stories helped Victorians expand their knowledge and vocabulary. It was common for families to read from literature, philosophy, and the sciences as part of their evening routine. This not only entertained but also educated. Intellectual pursuits were highly valued in Victorian society, and stories were a way to balance entertainment with enlightenment. The Victorians believed in lifelong learning, and what better way to nurture the mind than with a good story before bed? Storytelling before sleep, therefore, was an essential component of Victorian life. It was a ritual that brought families together, provided intellectual and emotional nourishment, and helped individuals relax and prepare for the rest of the night. Whether it was a fable with a moral lesson, a ghostly tale meant to send chills down the spine, or a piece of literature that transported the listener to another world, bedtime stories played a crucial role in creating a peaceful, restful environment. This tradition of storytelling may have faded in modern times, replaced by television, smartphones, and other forms of entertainment, but its essence remains. Bedtime stories in their various forms continue to provide comfort and connection, just as they did for the Victorians. Perhaps we can take a page from their book and bring back the art of storytelling before bed, not just for children but for adults too, creating space for reflection, relaxation, and connection before drifting off to sleep. As we continue to unravel the intricate sleep habits of the Victorians, we now delve into a practice that might seem peculiar to modern eyes, the role of sleepwalkers in Victorian culture. While sleepwalking is a phenomenon that we recognize today, the way it was viewed in the Victorian era holds a distinct charm and mystery, intertwined with superstition, medical curiosity, and even social class. Sleepwalking, or somnambulism, was a subject of great fascination for the Victorians. Unlike today, where we generally consider it to be a sleep disorder related to stress or medical conditions, Victorians believed that sleepwalking was a powerful indication of unresolved emotions or spiritual disturbances. It was not uncommon for people to attribute sleepwalking to mysterious or even supernatural forces. The boundaries between the waking world and the world of dreams seemed incredibly porous to the Victorians, and sleepwalking was an example of this blurred line. In Victorian society, sleepwalking was not only seen as a strange, mysterious occurrence, but it was also viewed through a moral and psychological lens. People believed that those who sleepwalked might have hidden anxieties, desires, or traumas that were preventing them from sleeping peacefully. For example, a man who had suffered financial ruin might be more likely to sleepwalk as a manifestation of his inner turmoil. Similarly, women often seen as the moral backbone of the family were sometimes thought to sleepwalk due to stress or emotional conflict. This psychological interpretation was in line with the Victorian fascination with the mind and the early theories of psychology that were beginning to take root. But there was more to the Victorian view of sleepwalking than just psychological analysis. The supernatural explanation for sleepwalking was also prominent. Some believed that sleepwalkers were walking between the realms of the living and the dead. In particular, ghost stories often featured somnambulists as individuals who in their sleep would wander through haunted houses or visit graveyards. These eerie accounts played into the Victorian obsession with death and the afterlife. Sleepwalking became a metaphor for the soul's restless journey between this world and the next. For the Victorians, the supernatural world was never far away, and sleepwalkers were often seen as being especially connected to it. Historically, the treatment of sleepwalking in the Victorian era was quite varied. Those who experienced sleepwalking episodes were often treated with a mix of practical and superstitious remedies. Physicians of the time, especially those working with the upper classes, might recommend hypnosis or mesmerism, believing that the patient's deep, unresolved emotions could be addressed in a trance-like state. Others might suggest herbal remedies, or in more extreme cases even electrotherapy to reset the patient's nervous system. Many of these treatments, while innovative for their time, were grounded in the limited understanding of the mind and body during the Victorian period. However, not all treatment for sleepwalking was clinical. Some people relied on family-based solutions. In some cases, family members would lock the doors and windows to prevent the sleepwalker from wandering into dangerous areas of the house. Others would use physical barriers, such as ropes or gentle restraints, to keep the sleepwalker safely in bed. But this wasn't always seen as an ideal solution, as many believed that preventing sleepwalkers from wandering was both intrusive and potentially harmful to their mental well-being. After all, the Victorian notion of the individual's privacy and autonomy was strong, and some even saw attempts to intervene in sleepwalking as a violation of the person's right to experience their sleep world. Interestingly, sleepwalking also had a social dimension. While it was often considered an affliction of the wealthy, or those who had the leisure to indulge in long hours of rest, sleepwalking was also a matter of concern for women in particular. The Victorian era had stringent expectations for women's behavior, and any signs of emotional instability, be it through sleepwalking anxiety or other symptoms, could lead to social stigma or even hospitalization. For women, sleepwalking was sometimes interpreted as a sign of weakness or hysteria, and this was a particularly sensitive issue during a time when women's mental health was often misunderstood or dismissed altogether. Victorian writers and poets also played a role in shaping the cultural understanding of sleepwalking. Edgar Allan Poe, with his Gothic haunting tales, often featured characters who wandered through the night lost in their dreams, as a reflection of their mental unrest. In his poem, The Sleeper, he explores the themes of death and the dream world blurring the lines between the two realms, a motif that echoed Victorian beliefs about the eerie connection between sleepwalking and the afterlife. These literary works added an element of mystery and fascination to the phenomenon of sleepwalking, further embedding it into the fabric of Victorian cultural imagination. Over time, as psychology and the understanding of mental health advanced, the Victorian interpretations of sleepwalking gradually faded. Theories rooted in spiritualism and supernatural beliefs gave way to more clinical approaches as doctors and scientists began to explore the neurological and psychological causes of sleepwalking. Today, we understand sleepwalking as a sleep disorder caused by a mix of genetic, environmental, and psychological factors. However, the fascinating Victorian views of sleepwalking as both a physical and spiritual experience remain a powerful reminder of the era's complex relationship with the mind, body, and soul. In modern times, sleepwalking is no longer viewed as a mysterious or supernatural event, but it still carries the intrigue that was once so prevalent in the Victorian imagination. Today, sleep disorders, including sleepwalking, are often discussed with a focus on medical and psychological interventions. However, we can't help but feel a sense of nostalgia for the time when sleepwalking was both a psychological puzzle and a supernatural enigma, offering a glimpse into the depths of the human mind and spirit. In essence, the Victorian fascination with sleepwalking speaks to their broader curiosity about the complexities of human consciousness. They were living in an age of rapid social change, and sleepwalkers became symbolic of the delicate balance between rationality and the unknown forces that guided human behavior. Sleepwalking, much like the rest of their sleep practices, was part of their quest to understand the mind and the restless soul. And it's a legacy that continues to shape how we think about sleep today. As we continue our journey through the curious world of Victorian sleep practices, let's now turn our attention to a particularly fascinating and perhaps unsettling aspect of their culture, the use of sleep tonics. While we today have an array of modern sleep aids ranging from melatonin supplements to prescription medications, the Victorians relied on a variety of herbal remedies, tinctures, and tonics to help them drift off to sleep. These potions were sold by chemists, doctors, and apothecaries, and were marketed as magical solutions for insomnia and other sleep-related ailments. At the heart of this practice was the belief that sleep could be engineered through the right concoction of herbs and chemicals. Many of these sleep tonics were made from natural ingredients such as valerian root, chamomile, and hops, all of which were believed to have calming and sedative properties. Valerian root, for example, has been used for centuries as a natural sleep aid, and the Victorians were no strangers to its effects. Chamomile was another popular herb commonly brewed into a tea before bedtime to soothe the mind and promote relaxation. But it wasn't just the herbs themselves that made these tonics so effective in the eyes of the Victorians. It was the combination of these ingredients with alcohol. Yes, many sleep tonics contained a high percentage of alcohol, often brandy or whiskey, which acted as a sedative in its own right. The alcohol content not only made these tonics potent, but also provided a sense of comfort and warmth, especially in the cold, damp climate of Victorian England. Alcohol was a known sleep inducer, and its inclusion in sleep tonics was a common practice at the time. However, as you might imagine, this combination of herbs and alcohol could lead to unintended consequences, especially if used frequently. These tonics were advertised as solutions for a variety of sleep-related problems, from mild insomnia to more severe cases of anxiety and restlessness. The Victorians, who lived in a time of great social upheaval, were often subjected to stress and anxiety, whether due to the demands of industrialization, personal finances, or family responsibilities. Sleep tonics provided a quick and effective way to temporarily alleviate those pressures, offering a brief escape into sleep. And for many, this escape was a welcome relief from the pressures of their waking lives. In the 19th century, there was little regulation of these products, and the claims made by their manufacturers were often exaggerated. Some tonics were touted as miracle cures capable of inducing sleep after a single dose. For the Victorians who lived in a world where insomnia and anxiety were common, these promises were hard to resist. The rise of the pharmaceutical industry in the Victorian era also meant that these tonics were becoming more widely available, and people from all walks of life could purchase them at the local chemist's shop. What was particularly striking about these remedies was their ability to cross class boundaries. Whether you were a member of the aristocracy or a factory worker, you had access to these sleep-inducing concoctions. However, as with many remedies of the time, these sleep tonics often came with dangerous side effects. The combination of alcohol and strong sedative herbs could be addictive, and prolonged use of these tonics sometimes led to dependency. The Victorians, particularly those in the medical field, had a limited understanding of addiction and the long-term effects of drug use. As a result, the widespread use of sleep tonics was not only a temporary solution to insomnia, but also a public health concern that was often ignored or overlooked. These remedies were considered safe and effective because they worked quickly, but their long-term effects on the body and mind were rarely considered. Interestingly, the popularity of these tonics also reflects the growing interest in scientific and medical advancements during the Victorian era. The rise of the medical profession and the development of new treatments for various ailments were major developments in 19th century society. But even as doctors and chemists developed new remedies, many Victorians remained skeptical of modern medicine, and often turned to alternative treatments like sleep tonics as a way to self-medicate. The social and cultural context of the time played a large role in shaping attitudes toward health and wellness, and the idea of natural remedies was deeply ingrained in the Victorian mindset. As the 19th century drew to a close, concerns about the side effects of sleep tonics began to surface. In the early 20th century, doctors and medical professionals began to realize the dangers of mixing alcohol with sedatives, leading to the regulation of these types of products. The use of alcohol-based sleep tonics began to decline, and other forms of medication, such as sleeping pills, became more widely available. Today, we have a much better understanding of the dangers of using substances like alcohol to aid sleep. But the legacy of the Victorian sleep tonic serves as a reminder of a time when medicine was not as advanced, and people were desperate for answers to their sleep troubles. While modern medicine has made great strides in helping people with sleep disorders, the Victorian reliance on sleep tonics highlights the ongoing human desire for rest and the lengths people are willing to go to achieve it. Despite the potential dangers of these remedies, they provided a temporary solution to a very real problem: sleep deprivation. In many ways, the Victorians were ahead of their time in recognizing the connection between mental health, physical health, and sleep, even if their methods were not always scientifically sound. Today, we can appreciate the ingenuity of their sleep remedies, while also acknowledging the importance of seeking safe, regulated treatments for sleep disorders. The story of Victorian sleep tonics reminds us that the search for restful sleep is as old as humanity itself, and it's a quest that continues to this day. Whether through herbal remedies, modern medications, or lifestyle changes, we continue to pursue the same goal that Victorians sought: a peaceful, restful night's sleep. As we delve deeper into the intriguing world of Victorian sleep practices, we now turn our attention to a rather fascinating and somewhat bizarre subject: the superstitions surrounding sleep. The Victorians, much like earlier societies, were steeped in a rich tapestry of beliefs, many of which were rooted in the supernatural. While they were living through a time of industrial progress and scientific discovery, the supernatural still held a strong grip on their imaginations, and this influence extended into their sleep habits. The Victorians believed that sleep was not just a physiological process, but a complex interplay of the mind, body, and spirit. They considered the act of sleeping to be a vulnerable time when the body was most susceptible to outside forces, whether they be from the physical world or, more intriguingly, from the supernatural realm. During sleep, it was thought that the soul might leave the body wandering into other realms, or even encountering spirits. Consequently, the Victorians took their sleep rituals very seriously, and many believed that the way they slept and even the position they slept in could either invite good dreams or invite dark forces into their lives. One of the most pervasive superstitions about sleep in the Victorian era was the belief in bad dreams or nightmares as an omen of impending danger or misfortune. Victorians would often turn to a variety of remedies to ward off these dreaded nighttime visitations. One popular superstition held that sleeping with your feet facing outward toward the door would invite bad spirits or death. This belief was rooted in the idea that the body would be vulnerable to spiritual attack if its feet were exposed, as this was the part of the body closest to the floor and thus closest to the supernatural forces that might arise from below. To protect themselves from these malevolent forces, Victorians would sometimes hang protective charms or amulets above their beds. These amulets were made from various materials ranging from iron, which was thought to ward off evil, to garlic, which was believed to prevent the entry of spirits. Others turned to spiritual symbols like crosses or religious icons which they believed could shield them from harm. It was not uncommon to see a small crucifix or a holy relic resting on the bedside table, or to hear a whispered prayer before sleep to ensure that the sleeper would be protected from both physical and spiritual harm. In addition to these physical protections, there were also many Victorian sleep rituals designed to invoke good dreams. A common belief was that if you placed a piece of bread under your pillow, it would act as a dream catcher, absorbing any negativity that might otherwise interfere with your sleep. The bread was seen as a kind of magical talisman, able to absorb bad thoughts, dreams, or spiritual energy. People also believed that sleeping with a key under the pillow would ensure that the sleeper had good, peaceful dreams. This practice was thought to symbolize security and protection, keeping the sleeper's soul safe from wandering spirits. Some superstitions also linked sleep with health and longevity. It was commonly believed that sleeping on one's right side would ensure a long and prosperous life, while sleeping on the left side could bring about illness or misfortune. These beliefs were rooted in medieval medical texts which claimed that the body's humors, a concept central to ancient and medieval medicine, could be balanced by maintaining a specific sleeping posture. The Victorians, still influenced by these ancient medical ideas, often adhered to these beliefs as they believed the physical alignment of the body while sleeping could have a profound impact on their health. While these superstitions may seem whimsical or even quaint to us today, they reflect the deep sense of uncertainty and fear that many Victorians had about the unknown. Despite the scientific advancements of the era, many still clung to beliefs that gave them a sense of control over their lives. Sleep in particular represented a vulnerable time when one's guard was down and the body was at rest. For many, these superstitions provided comfort and a sense of security in a rapidly changing world. Another superstition that gained popularity in the Victorian era was the belief in dream prophecy. The Victorians, like many cultures before them, often believed that their dreams could be glimpses into the future, offering warnings or glimpses of events yet to come. These prophetic dreams were often recorded in journals, and then analyzed for patterns. The Victorians had a rich tradition of dream interpretation, with many people turning to dream dictionaries to help them decipher the meaning of their dreams. While some dreams were seen as benign or random, others were considered to be direct messages from the spirit world, particularly if they involved death or tragedy. For the Victorians, dreams were more than just the random firing of neurons during sleep. They were seen as an essential source of wisdom and insight. Even within the realm of dream prophecy, however, superstition played a significant role. If you had a bad dream or a nightmare, it was often believed that you could ward off the negative energy by performing a ritual before getting out of bed. One such ritual involved rubbing your hands together and then placing them on your eyelids, a technique thought to dispel the lingering effects of the dream. Others believed that waking up at precisely midnight and repeating a special chant or prayer would protect you from the bad dreams that had previously disturbed your sleep. This mystical connection between sleep dreams and the supernatural continued to captivate the Victorian imagination, even in the face of scientific progress. For many, sleep was not just a time of rest, but an opportunity to commune with otherworldly forces, whether it was through spiritual experiences, prophetic dreams, or encounters with the spirits of the deceased. The Victorians' relationship with sleep was in many ways a blend of science and superstition. While they were advancing in their understanding of the body, mind, and sleep disorders, they also held on to deeply ingrained beliefs about the supernatural. These beliefs shaped not only their daily routines, but also their very understanding of the role sleep played in their lives. Today, many of these superstitions have faded, replaced by a more scientific approach to sleep and dreams. But the lingering echoes of the Victorian obsession with sleep's mystical qualities still have a place in popular culture. From sleepwalking to dream interpretation, the fascination with sleep's deeper mysteries continues to capture the human imagination, just as it did for the Victorians. As we continue to explore the fascinating sleep practices of the Victorians, it's time to turn our attention to sleep disorders and how they were understood in that era. Today, sleep disorders are a well-researched field with advances in science and medicine, providing us with a much clearer understanding of conditions like insomnia, sleep apnea, and restless leg syndrome. But during the Victorian period, the understanding of sleep disorders was far less advanced, and conditions like insomnia were often viewed through a lens of mysticism, moral judgment, and trial-and-error treatments. One of the most prevalent sleep disorders in Victorian times was insomnia, a condition that many people faced, particularly in the bustling, rapidly industrializing cities. For the Victorians, insomnia was not merely a matter of struggling to fall asleep. It was often seen as a sign of moral weakness or personal failing. The idea that an individual couldn't sleep properly was often tied to a sense of guilt or anxiety. In a society that placed a great deal of importance on personal discipline and industriousness, insomnia was considered a problem that had to be solved not just for the sake of rest, but for the sake of one's character. Victorians believed that a lack of sleep was indicative of emotional turmoil or personal imbalance, something that needed to be corrected for both mental and physical health. Doctors and specialists of the time didn't have the modern sleep aids we rely on today, so treatments for insomnia ranged from the herbal to the physical and even the psychological. One of the most common remedies was the use of herbal tinctures and tonics, much like the sleep tonics discussed earlier. The Victorians used herbs like valerian root and hop flowers, both of which were believed to promote relaxation and calmness, helping the insomniac find rest. However, despite the popularity of herbal remedies, they were not always effective, and many people turned to more drastic measures to try and find relief from their sleeplessness. One particularly strange treatment for insomnia involved the use of hypnosis. While we think of hypnosis today as a form of therapeutic treatment, the Victorians saw it as an almost mystical means of controlling the mind. Sleep specialists would sometimes use hypnotism to induce a trance-like state in the hopes of calming the restless mind and allowing the person to sleep. This practice was part of a larger trend of mesmerism, the theory that unseen magnetic forces could influence the body and mind. Hypnotists and mesmerists, often untrained in the medical field, offered their services to those suffering from insomnia, promising to help them achieve peaceful sleep. Though hypnosis didn't have the scientific backing we now associate with sleep therapy. It was a popular treatment among the upper classes. Other treatments for insomnia in Victorian times were rooted in social pressures and the desire to maintain outward appearances. Wealthy individuals who were unable to sleep might seek advice from their physicians, who often prescribed strict regimens that involved lifestyle changes. A typical recommendation might be to adopt a regular sleep schedule, avoid stimulants like coffee or alcohol in the evening, and engage in calming pre-sleep rituals like reading or listening to soothing music. In some cases, physicians would even suggest bed rest during the day, recommending that individuals take short naps to alleviate their sleeplessness at night. In an era that valued industriousness, this advice was often met with resistance as people were reluctant to take time off from work or daily duties. Interestingly, while the upper classes had access to these more refined treatments, the working class did not have the luxury of consulting doctors or seeking out herbal remedies. For the working poor, insomnia was simply a fact of life. People working long hours in factories or in domestic service rarely had the opportunity for rest, and as a result many found it difficult to sleep. The physical exhaustion from hard labor often kept people awake at night, and the stress of living in overcrowded, noisy environments only exacerbated the problem. Many working-class individuals found themselves battling insomnia without much hope for relief. The disparity between the treatment options available to the wealthy and the poor was a reflection of the social divides of the time, and this divide was especially evident in matters of health and well-being. As we move beyond the treatments of insomnia, it's also important to consider the cultural impact of sleep disorders during the Victorian era. For many people, the inability to sleep was not just a physical issue, it was a source of social embarrassment. Insomnia was often seen as a sign that one was not properly managing their life or their responsibilities. For women especially, insomnia could be linked to the notion of hysteria, a condition that was frequently associated with emotional distress or a perceived lack of self-control. The Victorian belief in the moral importance of rest meant that sleep disorders were sometimes framed as a personal failing, a weakness that needed to be overcome. Women who struggled with sleeplessness could be dismissed as overly emotional or mentally unstable, further fueling the stigma surrounding sleep disorders. For men, insomnia was often linked to mental strength. Victorians believed that the ability to work tirelessly without rest was a virtue, especially in the rapidly changing industrial world. Those who could keep working long hours and still sleep soundly were seen as admirable. On the other hand, men who suffered from insomnia were sometimes regarded with suspicion, as their inability to rest was perceived as a sign of emotional instability or weakness. This stigma extended to anyone who sought out medical help for their insomnia, as seeking help was seen as an admission of vulnerability, which was frowned upon in Victorian society. The connection between insomnia and the emotional state of the individual was a key theme during the Victorian era. The idea that sleep disorders were intrinsically linked to psychological well-being, whether due to personal stress anxiety or unresolved emotional issues, was a belief that reflected the era's growing interest in psychological theories. Though they didn't have the scientific understanding of mental health that we have today, the Victorians were already exploring the complex relationship between the mind and the body. The rise of psychoanalysis and the growing field of psychology would eventually bring more focus to the psychological factors behind sleep disorders. But during the Victorian era, the emphasis was often on moral and emotional control. Today, we know much more about the causes of insomnia, from genetic predispositions to circadian rhythm disruptions. But the Victorian understanding of sleep disorders was shaped by their cultural norms, medical practices, and social structures. While we may not share their views on morality and discipline, the Victorian focus on the importance of sleep both physically and emotionally continues to resonate today. It reminds us that sleep is not just a biological need, but a holistic experience that involves the mind, the body, and the soul. As we move forward in our exploration of Victorian sleep practices, let's dive into another key aspect of the era's culture: the importance of sleep hygiene and its connection to their broader views on health and well-being. While we might think of the term sleep hygiene as a modern concept often tied to healthy habits, such as avoiding screens before bed or maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, the Victorians had their own version of sleep hygiene, albeit with a different set of practices and beliefs. For the Victorians, sleep hygiene wasn't just about creating a quiet, comfortable space to rest. It was a deeply ingrained part of their daily routine and a reflection of their belief in personal discipline. Sleep was seen as a necessity for physical and mental health, and a properly rested body was thought to be better equipped to face the demands of life. As a result, sleep hygiene practices were considered a reflection of one's moral character. In an era that prized order and self-discipline, those who struggled with sleep were often seen as lacking in these virtues, and sleep habits were viewed as a marker of personal responsibility. One of the most important components of Victorian sleep hygiene was bedtime routine. Just as we today might set aside time for winding down, whether it's reading a book or meditating, the Victorians had their own structured bedtime rituals designed to promote restful sleep. The idea was to create an environment conducive to relaxation signaling to the mind and body that it was time to transition from the activities of the day to the restfulness of night. Some of these bedtime rituals included taking warm baths, drinking soothing herbal teas, and engaging in quiet activities like reading or writing in a journal. The idea was to eliminate any mental or physical tension before bedtime, allowing for a smooth transition into a deep, restful sleep. One of the most significant practices in Victorian sleep hygiene was the avoidance of stimulants before bed. The Victorians were highly aware of the impact that food and drink could have on sleep, and they adhered to strict rules about what should and should not be consumed in the hours leading up to bedtime. For example, it was common knowledge that caffeine in any form could interfere with sleep, so it was often recommended that individuals avoid coffee and tea in the evening. Instead, people were encouraged to drink soothing herbal infusions like chamomile or lemon balm, which were believed to have calming properties. These gentle remedies were thought to help relax both the mind and body, setting the stage for a peaceful slumber. The Victorians also believed in the importance of physical rest during the day, as part of a comprehensive approach to sleep hygiene. Though the working class had limited time to rest during the day, the wealthier classes often adhered to the belief that a midday nap or siesta was beneficial for both physical and mental health. This practice of taking short naps in the afternoon was considered an important part of maintaining energy and preventing exhaustion. In fact, for those who could afford the luxury, the nap was an essential part of their daily routine. It was believed that by taking a brief rest in the afternoon, individuals could re-energize themselves and ensure that they would sleep soundly at night. Of course, for the wealthier classes, sleep hygiene also extended to the sleep environment itself. The Victorians placed a great deal of importance on creating a sleep space that was both comfortable and free from distractions. Bedrooms were designed to be quiet, dark, and well ventilated with heavy curtains to block out light and drafts. The idea was to create an environment that was conducive to sleep, one that was free from the external stresses of the outside world. In fact, many Victorian homes had dedicated sleeping chambers away from the hustle and bustle of the rest of the house. The concept of a sleeping chamber was a space designed solely for rest and relaxation, free from distractions like noise, light, or social interaction. This commitment to creating the ideal sleep environment was a clear reflection of the Victorian belief in the restorative power of sleep. In addition to these environmental factors, Victorians also understood the importance of physical comfort in promoting good sleep hygiene. The bed itself was seen as a key component of this comfort, and a proper bed was considered an essential part of a good night's rest. The Victorian obsession with beds and bedding is legendary. Many people, especially the upper classes, went to great lengths to ensure that their beds were as comfortable as possible. The mattresses were typically filled with soft materials like feathers or horsehair, while the sheets and blankets were made from the finest cotton or linen. It wasn't uncommon for wealthy individuals to invest in custom-made bedding, designed to ensure the highest level of comfort. The Victorians believed that a well-made bed was not only a luxury, but a necessary tool for ensuring a good night's sleep. Sleep hygiene in the Victorian era also involved a strict sleep schedule. It was considered important to go to bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time each morning. The Victorians believed that maintaining a regular sleep schedule helped regulate the body's internal clock and promoted overall health. The consistency of bedtime was seen as a sign of personal discipline, and it was believed that those who adhered to a strict routine were more likely to experience restful sleep. This focus on routine was part of the larger Victorian value system, which emphasized the importance of structure and order in all aspects of life. While the Victorians had their own unique methods and practices for ensuring good sleep hygiene, many of their ideas still resonate today. The importance of a structured routine, a comfortable sleep environment, and the avoidance of stimulants before bedtime are still widely recommended by modern sleep experts. And just as the Victorians believed that sleep was essential for good health, we now know that sleep plays a critical role in everything from cognitive function to emotional well-being. In modern times, our understanding of sleep hygiene has evolved with advances in sleep science, but many of the core principles that the Victorians adhered to remain just as relevant. Whether it's winding down before bed with a calming activity, ensuring a restful sleep environment, or maintaining a consistent sleep schedule, we can still learn a great deal from the Victorians about the importance of good sleep hygiene and the profound impact it can have on our lives. As we continue to peel back the layers of Victorian sleep culture, we can't overlook one of the most unusual and sometimes controversial aspects of their sleep habits, sleep, as a moral and spiritual pursuit. In the Victorian era, sleep wasn't just about physical rest. It was seen as an opportunity to achieve higher moral standards, spiritual clarity, and even mental enlightenment. The Victorians, living in a society that placed a premium on moral discipline and spiritual integrity, believed that how one slept and prepared for sleep could have profound effects on one's character and soul. At the core of Victorian sleep practices was the belief that rest was not only a necessity for the body, but also a way of restoring the soul. In the midst of the fast-paced and often stressful demands of Victorian life, sleep provided a sacred space for reflection, renewal, and spiritual connection. This was particularly true for the upper classes, who had the luxury of creating serene and beautiful sleeping environments, designed not only for comfort, but also for spiritual and mental clarity. The process of preparing for bed was an act of self-discipline, and it was often seen as a way to align one's body and mind with moral and spiritual ideals. One of the most popular Victorian beliefs was that sleep was a time when the soul could leave the body and experience a more spiritual realm. This was in part rooted in the Christian worldview, which held that the soul was eternal and capable of existing independently of the body. The Victorians, particularly those with religious leanings, believed that sleep provided an opportunity for the soul to refresh itself just as the body rested. This belief is reflected in the Victorian practice of saying prayers before sleep. Before retiring for the night, many Victorians would recite prayers or scriptures invoking divine protection and seeking peace for the night ahead. For many, sleep was viewed as a temporary retreat from the burdens of the world, a moment to be at peace with oneself and with God. Interestingly, sleep was also seen as a form of mental purification. For those who struggled with anxiety or troubled thoughts, sleep provided an opportunity to surrender these worries, allowing the mind to reset and regain clarity. This belief was particularly relevant in a society that often demanded mental and emotional self-control. Many Victorians adhered to the idea that their minds should be disciplined and pure at all times, and sleep was a key element in maintaining that mental purity. The idea was that by entering into a peaceful meditative sleep, the soul and mind could achieve a sense of harmony, free from the chaos and stress of the waking world. But sleep wasn't just about individual peace, it was also linked to the larger societal values of the Victorian era. The Victorians believed that maintaining a regular disciplined sleep schedule was a sign of moral integrity. In a society that valued order, structure, and self-control, having a consistent bedtime was seen as an outward manifestation of personal discipline. Those who could adhere to regular sleep patterns were viewed as virtuous, while those who struggled with insomnia or irregular sleep habits were often seen as lacking in character. The moral component of sleep was so important that even insomnia was viewed as a problem to be addressed not just for health reasons, but for moral ones. The Victorians believed that an inability to sleep was a reflection of inner turmoil, unresolved emotional issues, or a lack of spiritual alignment. As a result, the search for sleep remedies during the Victorian period wasn't just about finding physical rest, it was also about achieving a moral and spiritual state of balance. The Victorians' focus on sleep as a moral pursuit extended beyond just personal practice. It influenced their treatment of others as well. Charitable work, especially among the poor, often included advice on proper sleep habits as part of a larger effort to promote health and virtue. Many Victorian philanthropists and social reformers believed that if they could teach the poor proper sleep hygiene and encourage them to adopt disciplined sleep routines, they could help elevate their moral character. The idea was that if individuals slept well and maintained a regular sleep schedule, they would be more productive, healthy, and morally upright. This belief in the connection between sleep and morality was deeply rooted in the Victorian social fabric, where class and personal responsibility were intertwined. For women in particular, sleep had a highly gendered significance. In a society where women were often expected to manage both the household and the emotional well-being of the family, sleep became a delicate balancing act between the demands of the home and the need for personal rest. Women were expected to uphold high moral standards, and sleep was often viewed as a time when women could restore their mental clarity and emotional strength. Women who were unable to sleep peacefully were sometimes viewed with suspicion, as if their inability to rest reflected some internal moral or emotional failing. Conversely, a woman who could sleep soundly was seen as someone who had achieved the ultimate balance between duty and personal well-being. Sleep was also a spiritual practice for many Victorian women. The act of going to bed, saying prayers, and preparing for the night was a deeply spiritual ritual, one that allowed women to reaffirm their connection to both their faith and their moral responsibilities. The Victorian woman's role was often seen as that of a moral and spiritual guide for the family, and her ability to maintain peace through sleep was seen as crucial to her success in this role. In this way, sleep was not just a personal need, it was a collective responsibility, especially for women. As we look back at the Victorian approach to sleep, it becomes clear that their views were heavily influenced by their broader cultural values. Sleep was not just something to be achieved for the sake of rest, it was a process that had moral, spiritual, and social implications. The Victorians believed that sleep could not only refresh the body, but also purify the soul, provide mental clarity, and help individuals live up to the high moral standards of their society. This complex relationship with sleep shaped much of their daily lives, and continues to influence modern ideas about sleep wellness and self-care today. While we may not share the same moral and spiritual views as the Victorians, their focus on sleep as an essential part of human well-being reminds us that sleep is not just a biological function. It is an experience that touches on our mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Today, as we navigate the complexities of modern life, perhaps we can learn from the Victorians in recognizing the importance of sleep, not only for our physical health, but also for our inner peace, mental clarity, and sense of balance. As we continue our exploration of the Victorian sleep experience, let's turn our focus to the somewhat unconventional sleep practices that were common during this period. While the Victorians were deeply concerned with creating the ideal sleep environment, certain individuals and subcultures within the society also experimented with more avant-garde approaches to sleep, often influenced by the prevailing theories of the time, or simply driven by a desire to be different. One such practice was the Victorian fascination with sleep as an intellectual pursuit. As the 19th century unfolded, the world witnessed a revolution in scientific and philosophical thought. The rise of Darwinism, the increasing popularity of psychological theories, and the growing influence of materialist philosophies caused many Victorians to view sleep as more than just a necessity. It was a gateway to understanding the mind. In a society so invested in intellectual exploration and self-improvement, some saw sleep as a way to tap into hidden mental reserves, or achieve clarity in thought. This intellectual approach to sleep can be best illustrated by the increasing interest in the practice of dream journals. Many educated Victorians, especially those influenced by emerging theories of psychoanalysis, began to view dreams as powerful windows into the subconscious mind. The idea that sleep could unlock the mysteries of the mind through the interpretation of dreams was rooted in the period's fascination with both the scientific and the mystical. People kept detailed journals of their dreams, recording every symbol and sensation they encountered during their sleep, believing that analyzing these entries might reveal hidden truths about their mental and emotional state. The practice of sleep analysis was not just confined to the upper classes. Working-class Victorians, too, would sometimes engage in this form of self-reflection, albeit in a more informal way. Some working people, especially those who experienced stressful lives, would write down their dreams after a night of poor sleep, hoping to discover patterns that could explain their worries or fears. The idea was to analyze the dreams as if they were puzzles to be solved, with each fragment of the dream providing a clue to one's mental health or emotional well-being. Yet, it wasn't just the dream journals that reflected the intellectual fascination with sleep. The Victorians also engaged in what could be considered sleep experiments, some of which were more bizarre than others. For example, some people tried to induce lucid dreaming, the practice of becoming aware of and controlling one's dreams by following specific techniques before sleep. These methods included focused breathing, mental repetition of certain phrases or images, and even using sleep tonics or hypnotism to increase the likelihood of lucid dreaming. This intellectual approach was part of a broader trend of trying to gain control over the unconscious, a pursuit that was in part fueled by the rise of psychology and the scientific study of the mind. As we've seen, the Victorians were not averse to experimenting with their sleep in search of better health or greater intellectual insight. But these practices were not always well received by society. There was a clear class divide in how sleep practices were viewed. For the elite, engaging in intellectual sleep experiments or consulting experts in sleep psychology was seen as a pursuit of cultural refinement. However, for the working classes, sleep practices were often more pragmatic and shaped by necessity rather than a desire for self-exploration. These class differences in sleep practices were deeply intertwined with the social structures of the time, and what was considered a respectable or intellectual approach to sleep for one class could be seen as strange or even frivolous for another. One particularly unconventional practice that gained some attention during the Victorian period was the belief in sleeping outdoors. While this might seem unusual by today's standards, many Victorians saw the practice of sleeping in the open air as a way to promote health and mental clarity. At the time, many believed that exposure to nature could help rejuvenate the body and mind, and sleeping under the stars was seen as a way to improve physical health, enhance sleep quality, and even improve one's character. Some Victorians, especially in rural areas, would sleep in summer houses or open-air tents, using natural elements like fresh air, moonlight, and the sounds of nature to aid in their rest. While this practice was more common in the countryside, it also made its way into certain parts of urban society, particularly among those who were keen on embracing nature as a remedy for the stresses of industrial life. This belief in the restorative power of nature was also reflected in the practice of sleeping near water. Some Victorians believed that the sound of running water, whether from a stream, river, or fountain, could act as a natural lullaby, soothing the mind and body into a deep and restful sleep. This belief gave rise to the creation of sleeping alcoves, or garden beds near water features, with many Victorians incorporating the tranquil sounds of flowing water into their sleep rituals. These practices were not just seen as restorative for sleep. They were also considered to have therapeutic properties, improving mental clarity and alleviating the stresses of modern life. Perhaps the most striking element of these unconventional sleep practices was the way they blended romanticism and rationalism. While the Victorians were living in a rapidly industrializing world, they also placed immense value on the natural world, and their sleep practices reflected this tension between the burgeoning scientific world and the deeply ingrained spiritual and emotional connections to nature. Their fascination with sleep was not just about improving health or combating the industrial grind. It was about creating a deeper connection to the universe, seeking meaning and peace even in the most mundane aspects of life. These intellectual, spiritual, and natural approaches to sleep would eventually fade as the modern world advanced, but they remain a fascinating window into the Victorian psyche. The Victorians were grappling with the rapidly changing world around them, and their sleep practices offer a glimpse into their attempts to reconcile the material and the mystical, the scientific and the emotional. Today, while we may not engage in the same rituals or practices, their belief in the importance of sleep and the mind-body connection continues to influence our understanding of sleep and health. As we reflect on these unconventional practices, it's clear that sleep for the Victorians was never just about rest. It was a complex, multifaceted experience that intertwined personal well-being, intellectual exploration, spiritual growth, and societal expectations. Sleep was both a biological function and a way to engage with the mysteries of the mind and spirit. And, perhaps in the modern world, as we continue to search for ways to improve our sleep and well-being, we can take a page from the Victorian playbook and embrace the idea that sleep is more than just rest. It's an opportunity for personal growth, reflection, and rejuvenation. As we reach the final chapters of our exploration into Victorian sleep practices, it's essential to reflect on how the era's profound attention to sleep continues to resonate today. We have touched on many aspects of sleep, from the rituals surrounding bedtime to the cultural and moral dimensions of rest. But perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of Victorian sleep culture is its focus on sleep's restorative power. The Victorians, in their pursuit of perfect sleep, were ahead of their time in recognizing the importance of good rest, not just for physical health, but for emotional well-being, spiritual clarity, and mental fortitude. In a time when life was often chaotic and societal pressures were high, sleep was seen as a refuge, a sanctuary where one could retreat from the trials of daily life. Today, in our modern, fast-paced world, we might not always regard sleep with the same reverence as the Victorians did, but their emphasis on the holistic benefits of sleep offers valuable insights for us now. The modern world has evolved with technology, medicine, and scientific advancements that have dramatically changed how we approach health, but the essence of the Victorian belief that sleep is an integral part of a balanced life still holds true. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in sleep hygiene, a concept that mirrors many of the Victorian practices that we've discussed. Just as the Victorians believed in the power of a regular routine, a comfortable sleep environment, and soothing bedtime rituals, modern sleep experts now emphasize these same principles. Research continues to support the idea that good sleep hygiene, such as having a consistent sleep schedule, minimizing distractions, and cultivating a calming bedtime routine, can lead to better overall health, just as the Victorians believed it would. One particularly important aspect of Victorian sleep practices that continues to have relevance today is the emphasis on mental health. The Victorians were keenly aware of the connection between sleep and emotional well-being, and their methods for promoting restful sleep often focused on soothing the mind as much as the body. Whether through stories, music, or soothing rituals, they understood that the mind needed to be prepared for rest. In today's world, where mental health issues like anxiety and depression are more widely recognized, there is a growing appreciation for the role sleep plays in managing these conditions. Experts now recognize that mental relaxation before sleep is essential for improving sleep quality, and the Victorian tradition of calming pre-bedtime rituals aligns closely with modern recommendations. Victorian attitudes toward sleep also laid the foundation for many of today's wellness practices, including meditation, aromatherapy, and the use of herbal remedies for relaxation. The Victorians were ahead of their time in recognizing that sleep is not merely a passive activity, but a restorative practice that involves the mind, body, and spirit. They understood that the quality of one's sleep could greatly affect their ability to function during the day, both mentally and physically. This holistic approach to sleep, focusing on relaxation routine and balance, continues to inform modern wellness practices. However, the Victorian era's unique relationship with sleep was not without its darker aspects. As we've seen, there were stigmas surrounding sleep disorders such as insomnia, and the moral implications of sleep difficulties often resulted in shame and judgment. Today, we know that sleep disorders are complex medical conditions and attitudes toward them have evolved. We now recognize that insomnia, sleep apnea, and other sleep-related issues are often linked to various underlying causes, including genetics, stress, and medical conditions. Advances in sleep science have provided us with a better understanding of these issues. But the Victorian obsession with achieving the ideal sleep still offers us a lens through which to consider the value of rest. Perhaps one of the most profound lessons the Victorians imparted to us is the idea that sleep is sacred. In their time, sleep was an act of self-care and a means of spiritual renewal. It wasn't simply a biological necessity, it was an opportunity to reconnect with the self and with the universe. Today, in a world where the pursuit of productivity and success often trumps the importance of rest, we could take a lesson from the Victorians and recognize that sleep is not a luxury, but a necessity. We need to prioritize it, cherish it, and give it the space and respect it deserves. The Victorians' reverence for sleep, with all its rituals, practices, and beliefs, serves as a reminder that sleep is more than just a biological process. It is a part of our emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. By paying attention to our sleep environments, establishing healthy routines, and allowing ourselves to unwind before bed, we can begin to understand the restorative power of sleep in much the same way the Victorians did. The pursuit of restful sleep, with all the care and attention that the Victorians gave it, remains just as relevant today as it was in the 19th century. As you prepare to rest tonight, consider the quiet, peaceful rituals that have been passed down through the generations. Whether it's through a calming routine, soothing music, or simply creating a peaceful, distraction-free sleep space, we can all benefit from the Victorian approach to sleep. In embracing the wisdom of the past, we can help ensure that sleep remains a powerful tool for health and well-being, just as it was for the Victorians. As we approach the final stages of our exploration into the world of Victorian sleep practices, we cannot overlook the profound connection between social class and sleep habits during this period. In Victorian society, social status profoundly impacted almost every aspect of life, and sleep was no exception. The manner in which one slept, the quality of one's sleep, and the space in which one slept were all closely tied to one's position in society. The wealthier classes had access to a level of comfort and luxury that allowed them to pursue their ideal sleep environments, while those of the working class were often left to make do with far less. For the upper class, sleep was not just a necessity, it was a status symbol. The Victorian elite understood that their ability to sleep well and in comfort reflected their social standing and their ability to afford the best possible materials for bedding and the most serene environments. The four-poster beds draped in luxurious fabrics, the finely crafted linens, and the custom-made mattresses were all indicators of wealth and refinement. A person's sleeping chamber, often the largest and most elaborately decorated room in a grand home, was designed to be an oasis of relaxation and comfort. Wealthy individuals spared no expense in ensuring that their sleep environment met the highest standards of luxury, not just for comfort's sake, but as a reflection of their refined tastes and elevated social position. For the middle class, sleep was still considered essential to overall well-being, but it was often more pragmatic than luxurious. While they did invest in better quality bedding and sleep environments than the working class, the middle class did not have the same financial resources to indulge in the opulence enjoyed by the wealthy. Instead, middle-class Victorians focused on creating functional, comfortable spaces that would allow them to rest after long hours of work. Their beds were still carefully chosen, often made with high-quality wool or cotton mattresses, but their sleep environments were designed more for practicality than for extravagance. The middle class placed great importance on the discipline of sleep, adhering to regular sleep routines as a reflection of their personal responsibility and moral integrity. For the working class, sleep was often not a luxury, but a necessity born out of sheer exhaustion. The working poor had little time or energy to focus on the refinement of their sleeping environments, as they were often working long hours in factories, fields, or domestic service. For them, sleep was about survival and rest, not comfort. Their beds were usually modest, often made with basic materials like straw or simple cotton. They frequently shared beds with family members as space was limited, and privacy was often a luxury they could not afford. However, despite these challenges, sleep was still valued as an essential part of daily life and working class. Victorians did what they could to ensure that they could get the rest they needed. The social divides in sleep practices were not only about the physical comfort of the bed, but also about privacy and control over one's sleep environment. The wealthy had private bedrooms that were separate from the rest of the household, allowing them to sleep undisturbed and without the noise or distractions of daily life. In contrast, the working class often had to make do with shared spaces, sometimes sleeping in crowded rooms, or even in common areas where the sounds and activities of others could disturb their rest. This lack of privacy further exacerbated the sleep challenges faced by the working poor, and many working-class families resorted to creative solutions to try and shield themselves from the disturbances of the environment. In addition to the material conditions that shaped sleep practices, the concept of sleep as a symbol of moral virtue was also tied to one's social status. The Victorians believed that those who were able to maintain a regular and disciplined sleep routine were morally superior, as they demonstrated the ability to regulate their bodies and minds. The wealthy and middle classes were often praised for their self-discipline, while those in the working class who struggled with irregular sleep patterns were sometimes viewed as lacking in character or self-control. This moral aspect of sleep further entrenched social divisions, as those who were unable to sleep properly were often subject to moral judgment. The emotional and psychological impact of these class differences in sleep habits was significant. For those who had access to ideal sleeping conditions, sleep was not only a time of rest, but also an opportunity for emotional and spiritual renewal. Sleep was an act of self-care and personal indulgence, providing an escape from the pressures of daily life. However, for those in the lower classes, sleep was often a refuge from physical exhaustion, rather than an opportunity for rest and recovery. The lack of adequate sleep due to poor working conditions and crowded living spaces had a detrimental effect on both the body and the mind, contributing to feelings of frustration, anxiety, and hopelessness. Victorian society's rigid social structures meant that the ability to sleep well or even to rest without interruption was a privilege reserved for the few. The wealthy and middle classes could afford the luxury of restful sleep in a quiet, private space, while the working class was left to cope with disrupted sleep, long hours of labor, and poor living conditions. This disparity in sleep experiences was a reflection of the broader inequalities of Victorian society, where access to basic needs like rest and health was dictated by one's position in the social hierarchy. As we look at the legacy of Victorian sleep practices today, it's clear that social inequality still affects how people experience sleep. While we may have made great strides in sleep science and medicine, access to quality sleep is still largely influenced by socioeconomic factors. People who live in crowded environments or work in high-stress jobs are more likely to experience sleep disturbances and disorders, just as the working poor did in Victorian times. In modern society, as in the Victorian era, sleep continues to be a reflection of social status, and the ability to rest peacefully remains a luxury for some and a struggle for others. Despite these challenges, the Victorian emphasis on sleep hygiene and the recognition of the profound impact sleep has on overall health continue to be valuable lessons for us today. Just as the Victorians understood the need for a regular routine, a comfortable environment, and a mental preparation for sleep, we now know the importance of these factors in achieving restorative rest. While the class divides of the past may have shaped how Victorians slept, we can take inspiration from their dedication to sleep as an essential part of well-being, and continue to advocate for a society where everyone, regardless of social status, has access to the rest they need for physical, emotional, and mental health. As we approach the final stages of our journey into the intricacies of Victorian sleep culture, it is essential to examine one last critical element: the role of sleep in maintaining social and familial structures. During the Victorian era, sleep was not just an individual practice. It was deeply intertwined with the fabric of family life morality and societal expectations. Sleep habits were a reflection of social order, and how families organized their rest periods said much about their values and status.